Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the April 1st, 2013 Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority meeting. Let's start out by asking each of you to either put your cell phone on silent or vibrate. And I can always tell people jump at this point because they know their cell phones are still on. Madam Clerk, roll please.
Thank you, and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, we have a tradition at our council meetings, which is that we have one of Los Gatos super students help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Today, that leader is George Ross. So first I'm going to ask George to come up here and stand beside me. Now, there's a reason that I'm asking George to join me up here, in addition to the fact that he will be leading us in the pledge, and that's because I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. And I always find it interesting to be able to see the person that I'm telling you about. George Ross is a third grader at Van Meter Elementary School. His favorite subjects are social studies and science. He cleaned up litter at Guadalupe River and helped paint Lee Matson Middle School for the Synopsis Community Improvement Day. He also helped sort and pick Christmas gifts for the family giving tree. He plays basketball, soccer, flag football, and lacrosse. He likes to ride his scooter, play chess, and play video games. And we always save the best for last. He hiked and camped the Inca Trail in Peru to 14,800 feet on the trek to Machu Picchu. His tour guide said that he was the youngest person he had ever guided on the Inca Trail. Let's give him a round of applause. Now I'm going to ask you to stand as he leads us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Give him a round of applause. All right, and then tonight we have a couple of presentations. I am going to make my way down here to the podium. To join me up here, and I am going to hand her a proclamation and ask her to hold on to the pretty one while I read the readable one. Whereas National Poetry Month seeks to highlight the extraordinary legacy and ongoing achievement of poets, introduce people to the pleasures and benefits of reading poetry, bring poets and poetry to the public in innovative ways, and make poetry an important part of our children's lives. And whereas Town of Los Gatos has appointed Erica Goss as Poet Laureate, and Ms. Goss is engaged in efforts to make poetry an essential part of the arts and humanities in Los Gatos, affecting every aspect of life in Los Gatos, including education, the economy, and community pride. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Barbara Spector, by the virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the town of Los Gatos, do hereby deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim the month of April 2013 to be National Poetry Month within the town of Los Gatos, and call upon all citizens to make poetry a part of daily life in Los Gatos, proclaimed this first day of April 2013 in the town of Los Gatos, County of Santa Clara, State of California.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Oh, I'll step in the center. I'm never at a loss for words except when I need to speak. I just want to express my thanks to the town of Los Gatos and the town council especially, and my volunteers, Poetry Los Gatos, and everyone for their enthusiasm, their ideas, their endless trekking of poetry on paper all over town. We're going to have some very fun events happening. Look for poems in the windows of shops and libraries and schools around town. Our library will be handing out poems to whoever asks. We will have an endless supply during the month of April. On April 18th, we will have Poem in Your Pocket Day. So look for volunteers around town who will be handing out poems from brightly colored baskets. Also, on April 25th, there will be a poetry reading at Great Bear Coffee. Everyone is welcome. It starts at 6:30, and there will be an open mic, and I really encourage young people to come and read their poetry. It will be a very appreciative audience, and we'll have a few little prizes to give away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, continuing on with the theme, I'm going to ask Joanne Telesfor to come up front and join me. I'm just going to introduce Joanne. Not only is she a planning commissioner, but that's not why she's here. She's also has been an educator in our town, and she has promoted the arts, especially for our young people throughout the community. So at this point this evening, I'm going to turn the mic over to Joanne, and she's going to take the program from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. As an educator and a longtime champion of the arts in Los Gatos schools, it's a privilege to be here tonight to introduce you to 3 students representing Fisher Middle School who will be reading their poems in honor of National Poetry Month. And I'd like to offer my congratulations again to Erica Goss, our Poet Laureate. 8th grade teacher Grace Donatelli Sordo challenged her English class this year to write poems using the beginning line concept of where I am from, based on memories of their lives to this point. Students were encouraged to add any of the details, aspects, or memories that they have that makes them who they are and while they live here in Los Gatos. So as you listen to these poems, I think you too will be impressed by their depth and insights of who these students are and where they are from. So in the order will be Ryan McGrath, Maddie Kleiss, and then Kayla Mills. Thank you very much for this opportunity for these students. So with that, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan McGrath, and this is my Where I'm From poem. I am from my backyard, from big bushes that get flowers in the spring, and a big evergreen with chirping birds with nests at the top. From a cool pool that is shaped like a jelly bean, and a square hot tub that steams when it's cold out. I am from the kitchen, from hot chili with lots of beans and spaghetti, The chili is my grandmother's recipe. From desserts like brownies with lots of chocolate that melts in your mouth, and sometimes cake with lots of frosting. From my dad's hot juicy steaks and hot dogs too. I'm from my front yard, from playing tag with sometimes scraped knees, and playing ball tag with a hard tennis ball. From doing kickflips to varial kickflips on my skateboard, mostly falling on the hard black asphalt and getting bandages inside. I am from my mother, from helping me with my homework to very good home-cooked meals. From my father, that works at Google and playing catch outside and helping me ride a bike. I am from moving from Sunnyvale, California when I was very little to wonderful Los Gatos. I am from my memories, from a garage with lots of spiderwebs and dusty old boxes, from my skateboard, bike, and my helmet and pads, from my dad's old ski equipment to my mom's old bike, to fishing poles and earthquake emergency kits. I am from a fantastic, great family and a super awesome house. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maddie Kleiss, and this is my Where I Am From poem. I am from two separate houses. One is the Brady Bunch with more than four. Another is just my siblings and mom, who are never a bore. I am from Arizona, where there is dust storms and heat. Cacti everywhere, so watch your seat. I am from a crazy family, cousins, uncles, and aunts, and the littlest who runs around without any pants. I am from the middle of the three. We have our ups and downs, but there's always a smile on me. I am from close friends who are there for me. We always tell jokes and hang out, and I am there for them without a doubt. I am from having an outrageous dog and my cat named Fred, loving and playful as I watch them near my bed. I am from moving back and forth to schools. First California, then Arizona, then California again. Can't wait for Los Gatos High School to begin. I am from tons of sports, water polo, wakeboarding, and softball that I adore. Always doing my best to win or score. I am from just being me, trying to raise my bars. I will always be shooting for the stars.
My name is Kayla Mills, and this is my Where I'm From poem. I'm from the ghetto streets of San Jose, biking all around, the blueberry bushes of Michigan among the snowy ground. I am from Daddy Bear, the first one I ever loved. From my mother who didn't care, yet I loved all the more. I'm from Miss Angela at the Veterans Hospital helping everyone. I'm from 6 different nationalities, proud to be unique. I'm from Sunnyvale to Palo Alto, Nebraska, Nevada to Florida, and Los Gatos, and soon Santa Cruz. I'm from memories good and bad. I'm from April 12th, 2010, the day my daddy died. There are many things that have happened. Where I'm from stays the same. Nobody or nothing can change the past. Yet I'm happy that the grass is getting greener at my side. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, students, very much. All right, closed session report for March 25th and April 1st.
The council met, as the mayor mentioned, last Monday, March 25th, and again tonight on April 1st on matters as duly noticed in the agenda. Council took no formal action at those closed sessions, and there's nothing to report out this evening.
Thank you. Before we go any further, anyone wishing to speak this evening, either on verbal communications or on any matter that is on our agenda, please submit one of these cards to the clerk over to my left. So So fill out these cards and submit it, just as somebody just did. All right, so these are for verbal communications, which are on items not on our agenda. If you intend to speak on something that is on our agenda, please fill out a card also. All right, at this point, we have council matters. Does any council member wish to report out on anything that has occurred, I guess, in the last 2 weeks? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. In the last 2 weeks, I had the opportunity to attend Art in the Council Chambers. I also had the opportunity to attend the Seniors of Distinctions Award Committee and the West Valley Sanitation Committee meeting, where they are discussing some potential fee increases for our how can I say it, sanitation plant modernization project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Przinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the last 2 weeks, I participated in 2 commission meetings, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in Oakland on the 27th and Association of Bay Area Governments in Oakland on the 21st. I also represented the council at the Casa Fashion Show on Saturday at Los Gatos High School, and I did very well.
If you don't say so yourself. In the past 2 weeks, I have been at a general plan committee meeting along with Mr. Przinski, and at that meeting, we were considering the housing overlay zones, and that no decisions were reached, but we did go forward, and that meeting was continued into April. Along with the town manager, we attended the mayor-manager, West Valley mayor-manager meeting here in Los Gatos at OPA, where the points of discussions were the ABAG RENA numbers being imposed on various cities, and also the methodology utilized in giving West Valley cities and other entities their tobacco scores. And lastly, along with the vice mayor, I attended Art in the Council Chambers, where this art that you see was done by Melissa Eyre, who is a Los Gatos resident and also a member of our Arts Commission. Manager matters.
Mayor, members of the council, 3 quick items. First, I want to introduce you to Shelley Neese, who has joined us across the dais as the new deputy town clerk and will be staffing you at council meetings for the foreseeable future, reporting to Mazarin, your administrative clerk. Second, this Wednesday at 3 p.m., April 3rd, we have the Forbes Mill Footbridge rededication for the new art panels prepared by youth working through the Recreation Department under the leadership of the Arts and Culture Commission. And I know the council is attending and the public is invited as well. Similarly, on Saturday, April 20th at 11 a.m., we will be doing the pageant grounds reopening and rededication as part of our Arbor Day and Earth Day celebration, which leads nicely into tonight's Did You Know, which is about keeping Los Gatos beautiful, and presenting that will be Monica Wren.
Good evening. Is it on? Okay. Good evening. Did you know April is Keep Los Gatos Beautiful Month? Each April, Keep Los Gatos Beautiful is celebrated with town and community-sponsored events focusing on the beauty and sustainability of Los Gatos. A newsletter is created to inform the community of these events and provide them with information regarding the current sustainability efforts in town. Local nonprofits and agencies that service Los Gatos are also invited to join us at our farmers market booth to provide education to our community. Cafes in town are also invited to participate in the Bring Your Own Mug campaign by offering special discounts to patrons who bring in a reusable mug. Posters and advertising have been provided to the participating cafes. For more information, you can visit our website at the address on the screen or contact me in the Economic Vitality Office at the number above. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All All right, we're now at the consent calendar portion of our agenda, where we will be voting on all consent items unless any is pulled from the consent calendar, and those can be pulled by the council member or the audience. Does anybody from the council wish to pull? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is the conceptual approval and conditions for donations of a permanent stage at Los Gatos Civic Center. Does any other council person wish to pull? Yes, Ms. Jensen.
I'd like to pull item 7, please.
All right, we've now pulled item 7, which is a height pole and netting policy. Does anyone else wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? All right, there's nobody else from the council. Does anyone from the audience wish to pull an item from the consent calendar other than 3 or 7? Seeing no one coming forward, the remainder of the items can be approved as a consent item with one motion. May I have a motion? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the consent calendar with the exceptions of items 3 and 7 for now.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We will hear items 3 and 7 in order after verbal communications. So we are now at verbal communications, and if you want to speak on verbal communications, please submit a card. I have several people who already have. You will have 3 minutes, and first person is Barbara Dotson.
Good evening, council members. My name is Barbara Dotson, and I live on Marchmont Drive. I have been involved with issues relating to Hillbrook School, and I would like to draw the council's attention to an action item in the town's general plan that I think is very relevant to the situation. This item calls on the town to, quote, develop standards for traffic, noise, intensity, and overall size for non-residential uses in residential zones. As you know, Hillbrook School is a non-residential use in a residential zone, but no standards currently exist for traffic from such a non-residential use. Since the issue of Hillbrook traffic will probably come up in the fall, this is a timely item. When I asked our planner about this action item, she said that the council determines the priority of the general plan's action items and that this item is not on the work plan. However, since this action item is so relevant to an upcoming issue, I'm wondering if it can be added to the work plan. I personally have been curious about standards for traffic for dead-end streets and local residential streets. It seems to me that we need to ask, what are the limits on traffic for a dead-end local residential street like Marchmont? This is important because Hillbrook should not be generating more traffic than would be appropriate for Marchmont to generate all by itself. I found a couple of answers on the internet, but I'm guessing town staff will have better sources of information. Here, though, is what I found. One study of dead-end streets recommends that traffic from non-residential uses in residential neighborhoods should be no higher than 100 vehicles per day. We would not go so far as to recommend that Hillbrook limit itself to 100 cars per day. On the other hand, Hillbrook should not feel free to continue generating its current level of more than 1,000 cars per day. Other sources give information for traffic on local streets. The Institute of Transportation Engineers uses a formula for average daily traffic rates. Based on their formula, Marchmont should average no more than 485 trips over a 24-hour period. Pleasanton uses what they call quality of life level of service, and they come up with 500 as the appropriate daily traffic rate for local streets. Other towns and counties in California and towns in other states give different numbers, though the numbers I found were always under 500. I hope Council will see that now is the time to put this general plan action item into effect, at least in relation to a standard for traffic for non-residential uses in residential zones. Such a standard would be useful not just for the Hillbrook situation, but for the Stratford School issue and for other public uses such as churches in residential zones. Thank you.
Questions from Ms. Dotson? No? Okay, thank you. Ann Robinson.
Tonight I want to talk about the vision statement on page 4.1-4 of the Albright Business Park Draft Environmental Impact Report. It says, when evaluating the project's consistency with the goals and policies of the 2020 general plan, portions of the town's vision statement that pertain to the CEQA review of the proposed project is as follows. Residents expect all new development to fit into the fabric of the community, and they expect that new businesses will enhance their high quality of life. Residents hold proposed development projects to a higher standard because what is approved in other communities may not be acceptable in Los Gatos. Preserving the small-town character of Los Gatos requires attention to a collection of related issues, including human-scale development, historic preservation, density and intensity, population growth, downtown preservation, development in the Highway 85 North 40 area, congestion, open space, views of hills, the type of businesses located in town, protection of the town's various neighborhoods, and community design. I'd like to talk tonight about the portion of this section that refers to the protection of the town's various neighborhoods. In the draft environmental impact report, the photo simulations of the project indicate that a combination of proposed setbacks, existing trees to be retained along the southern border and western site boundaries, and proposed landscaping would obscure views of the project buildings from the adjacent Charter Oaks residences. See figures 4.2-5 and 4.2-6, which would help to buffer adjacent residences and increase land use compatibility. That were given. Number one is north. Oh, sorry. Maybe I can just take this off. The number one viewpoint is looking north down Charter Oaks Drive onto the trail, Los Gatos Street Trail. Number two is looking north down Willow Hill Court, and number three is looking west down Willow Hill Court. If you look at the site plan with the building overlay, the number one viewpoint north down Charter Oaks Drive is a view of an area where there's no buildings located. Same with number two, the viewpoint is there's no buildings located there. And number three, the viewpoint down looking west down Willow Hill Court, is a view of the buildings, but it was taken during a time when the deciduous trees had leaves on them, and it really wasn't an accurate portrayal. If you actually look and study the site plan and you go down there, there is going to be a pretty significant impact, even though they're putting, I guess, 36-inch canary pines along the border there, which will be about 12 feet. But you really have to look at it. You have to go and look. The next time I speak, I'll be referring to the impact of building number 4 on the Charter Oaks, which was omitted in the draft environmental impact report, and I'll have photos of that.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes. Do you have questions of Ms. Robinson?
Ms. Robinson, if you could wait a second. First, I have a question of staff, I guess. Is it appropriate to ask Ms. Robinson a question not regarding what she spoke about just now, but regarding another item on the agenda which is related?
If you're asking me, the chair,
I'd be happy to.
the chair is that you would ask her what she spoke about now.
That's correct.
Okay. No questions.
It's a good thing that we agreed. If you're going to speak on verbal communications, please submit a card. Next speaker is Jean Torre.
Good evening. Am I speaking into this? My name is Jean Torre. I'm an owner and resident in the Charter Oaks community that abuts the Albright Way project. Tonight I want to convey some of the concerns I have about how the town has been handling that project, in particular the draft environmental impact report and the request for story poles. In the draft EIR, there are a number of omissions and inconsistencies specifically related to traffic, tree removals, and what it calls aesthetics, the lighting, effect of its lighting, views from neighboring communities, and so forth. Traffic on Lark Avenue already approaches gridlock at various times and days, not just commute and school times. How the addition of thousands of trips from the Albright project alone, not to mention other approved and proposed projects in the area, can yield no significant impact is beyond me. The EIR does not address overall LARC flow or the flow of traffic into and out of LARC from the 5 communities, neighborhoods along LARC for which LARC is the only way in and out. The report dismisses these unsignaled intersections as, quote, rarely limiting the capacity of the roadway, unquote. Well, yes, if cars can't get in and out into the roadway, they're not going to have much of an effect on the traffic in that roadway, which is Lark Avenue. Right now, even with the Albright property mainly empty, southbound Winchester to eastbound Lark backs up. Eastbound Lark backs up at Oka Garden Hill 17, Los Gatos Boulevard, and not Charter Oaks Drive. Westbound Lark backs up at University. The left turn lane into University fills back into the main traffic lane. Just today at 3:30 p.m., westbound Lark was backed up past Charter Oaks Drive onto the Los Gatos Creek Bridge. Tree removals are not identified in the environmental impact report. As Ann indicated, they're shown as blocking the views of the property from the neighboring residences, but there's no indication of which of the trees that are there now will be gone. Story poles have been requested, but what's been provided provides only a single point for the various buildings. This is not sufficient for anyone to determine the impact of the mass of these buildings, in particular Building 4, Building 3, and the parking structure, all of which abut Charter Oaks community. What I'm asking the town to do is to require the installation of appropriate story poles at multiple points on each side of those 3 buildings, and also to send the sections of the environmental impact report back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Thank you. Question? There are questions. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, ma'am. Did you get an opportunity to look at the proposed story pole policy that the council is going to be discussing
No,
tonight?
the first I heard about it was when I got here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Torrey,
Questions?
what is it about the current height depiction, the cranes, that you consider insufficient?
The cranes that are in place, the one in place that represents Building 4 is about midway between the eastern side of that building, which is the one that faces Charter Oaks. The one for Building 3 is midway along its long side. It kind of runs parallel to Winchester, whereas Building 4 is more or less perpendicular to Winchester. The crane that represents the parking structure is approximately at the northeast corner of it, when it's the south side of that entire structure that faces the residences in Charter Oaks. One single point is not really sufficient to evaluate the sort of mass of each of those buildings. Also, those cranes are sort of nestled nicely in the trees that are there, whereas certainly for Building 3, the trees that surround the story pole will be gone because the building will be there. Likewise, it's very difficult to even find those poles from the Charter Oaks side because of the trees that are there now, many of which I believe are going to be removed. So, determining to see those poles is not really adequate at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Anything else?
No, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now I have no more cards for verbal communications, and seeing no one coming forward. This is verbal communications. Agenda item 7 and agenda item 3 have been pulled from the consent calendar and will be heard in order. All right. As I understand it, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, John Shepherdson, you want to come forward? You have a card for Agenda Item 7, and so you will be called for Agenda Item 7, which is the height pole and netting policy. If you want to speak on something not on our agenda, you can do so now. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. John Shepherdson, 120 Oak Rim Way. This is with respect to the Albright project. I would suggest to each of the council members that if you have a chance to actually make the walk across the bridge there, going across 85 towards the project. I happened to go out there and took a number of pictures and made that walk, and it concerns me that even though the cranes or the cherry pickers have a limited sort of capability of showing the structures, I was able to visualize that a fair amount of the Los Gatos Mountains will be obstructed as you're making that way in. And if we view this area, this roadway, as a gateway, personally, I would not want to do something that would take away from what I think makes Los Gatos special, and that is these wonderful mountains that we have as a backdrop. So that's my first point, is to suggest that you make that walk. And secondly, with respect to the cranes themselves, given the fact that the debate is the negotiation, if we call it town negotiation, is involving a $250 million project, $250 million project. And given that, I think that the larger the project, the more important that we get it right in terms of these cranes and the story poles. And so I would suggest that what's out there now was certainly a good faith effort, but I think given the magnitude of the project that we can do something better, maybe orange netting from one of the cranes to another of the cranes, and then something like that, so at least you can see, okay, that's going to be the top of the building from here to here, so that the community has a better sense. Because I think most of the people that drive past there don't even realize that those cranes recognize the location of buildings.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. All right. Anybody else for verbal communications? Yes, we do. And this is for matters not on our agenda. Hold on just a minute. We're sort of in transition here. Jack Van Naden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My 3 minutes will be to address the traffic on Albright. The numbers used to establish a basis for traffic increases were based on an estimate of what traffic should have been, not what was actually coming from and going to the site. That's theory over reality. Why didn't they look at the companies that were there prior to the purchase and base the study on more accurate employee counts versus projected accounts? Using the traffic generated by previous users would have generated a more accurate picture of the projected traffic increase. With a more accurate picture of the traffic increase, couldn't we do a better job of projecting the associated costs? For instance, Lark Avenue has traffic of over 30,000 cars per day. Once you add Albright, the North 40, and all the other projects, we predict that the traffic on Lark will double to about 60,000 cars per day. How can you plan for that if you're using misconstrued numbers on this and other projects? Why misconstrued numbers? The Albright traffic study is assuming that the old 250,000 square feet that currently exists, if fully occupied, would generate the same number of cars as would be soon developed in the new 250,000 square feet. So that was a wash. Thus, when they figured the 300,000 square feet, it would generate only 3,126 additional cars. But have you heard of some of these following companies? Watlow Anaphase, Peninsula Histopathology, Laboratory, Arcwave, Video Optics, Golf Tempo, Nexray, Valley Construction. These are the companies that were there before the purchase. My bet is that they did not do high-density design for their employees. If Google and Facebook design their facilities for 1.5 to 2 times the standard used by most companies today, how many employees do we think are really going to occupy this new modern office space that costs more than 2 times the space Google and Facebook are paying? It's not going to be the 3,126 cars based on averages, but it's more likely going to be 1.5 to 2 times that to cover the costs of very expensive space. Who then pays the costs of the additional cars? Residents of Los Gatos in terms of both direct and indirect costs. Who can or will justify those? We need to have our staff that is looking out for the citizens, not just for the additional tax dollars that are going to be generated, but someone who's calculating the true cost to us, the citizens of Los Gatos. There will be revenue from tax dollars, but let's also do some realistic projections on the true costs of widening Lark Avenue, the additional cost of widening the Lark Avenue Bridge, increased pollution, and the additional cost to drive anywhere in the north end of town.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Van Natta? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak to us on verbal communications? This is on matters not on our agenda. I now see no one coming forward. So we're going to start in order of our agenda items, beginning with number 3, conceptual approval and conditions for donations of a permanent stage at the Los Gatos Civic Center. And just for terms of process, this matter was pulled from the consent calendar by Councilmember McNutt. I will start with her and ask her to explain why she pulled it from the consent calendar. I will then look to staff to give us any input that they have. Council may then ask questions of staff. We will then turn to the verbal input from the members of the audience. And then back to the council. So starting with Ms. McNutt, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, this agenda item asks for the council to give conceptual approval for a permanent stage out on the Civic Center lawn. And coupled with that is the fact that there is a fundraising effort underway as a memorial to Peter Carter that is, at least at this point, linked to having that memorial fund go to funding the stage. My problem with this is not with the idea necessarily of a permanent stage, and certainly it's not with interfering at all with any kind of memorial fundraising in honor of Peter Carter. My problem is that if we, at this point, approve a conceptual design, we are in fact approving a permanent stage without knowing its location, its design, its materials, its cost, its policy, use policy, and I feel like we, by approving a conceptual design, are eliminating a lot of public steps and public input opportunities. And if, as we go through that process after a conceptual approval, we run into any glitches, then we make things very difficult if money has already been raised with a specific use in mind. So I feel this is premature and that we need a lot more information before we can head down this path.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, would it be your suggestion from staff's point of view that you address what Ms. McNutt has just raised, or shall I look to see if other council people have anything to add before you?
The mayor's preference, I could address any and all questions at once.
Other council people have anything to add? Ms. Jensen.
I was actually going to pull this item, but Councilmember McNutt did it for the same reasons that she identified. I do think we're putting the cart before the horse, and we create expectations by raising funds when we don't have all the information that we need. We have received communications from members of the public regarding this. We also received the solicitation and donation policy, which to my reading seems to be more directed at town fundraising rather than private fundraising. And it also contemplates a town identification of needs, and a permanent stage is not one. I think we also need to explore who would use the stage and whether it's more practical to have a movable stage for new public spaces that we're going to have rather than a permanent stage. I'm very concerned about the location. I'm concerned about the overall continuing costs. And I generally agree with those issues raised by Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. I thought that Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I concur with the two previous council members' testimonies. I would like to add a couple other thoughts I had in addition to what they had already said. Currently, we have a number of people looking to do wonderful things for our Civic Center area. And one of those things is a Veterans Memorial. One of those things may or may not be an art museum / history museum in our old library space. One of those may be a permanent stage. We have some needs for our own town in the old library space as well. But to make a long story short, there's a lot of different groups that are planning on wanting to make improvements to the Civic Center. And I think it would be a good idea to engage members of all these different committees and see if there's some synergies. I don't know if that's a job for the community outreach coordinator, Jackie Rose. I think she's already working with the veterans on their ideas. But there are a lot of individuals in all these different groups that are members of the same organizations. For instance, maybe Friends of the Library has some individuals that are also on the museum board. People who are working in the veterans group are also in the Kiwanis Club. Therefore, rather than have a civic center with a bunch of folks competing for space in all these different areas and wanting to put money into it, which is great, everyone has good intentions, I think to come up with a cohesive plan or a theme, a constant theme for all these ideas, put into one so it does not look like a bunch of competing groups jockeying for space or making additions to the Civic Center that may not flow. So that's where I'll leave it.
Council? Mr. Brzezinski.
I think we're getting towards consensus even before we've heard from our public. But I would say we're looking at the benefits of a very active and engaged community. And we have a lot of people out there who are willing to put their own energy as well as financing into things that are going to enhance the community. But each of the council perspectives has merit, and I agree with all. And I think that at this point in time, I would not want us to be seen as dampening that enthusiasm and the spirit of those individuals who want to move forward with this, but let's put it back through the process. And I think ultimately we will come up with a good solution that we cannot actually move towards tonight, given the timing and the lack of outreach that we've had to the community so far.
Council? All right, so at this point, I'm going to look to Mr. Larson to see if he has anything to add, and then if members of the public wish to speak, they will have their opportunity. Mr. Larson.
Mayor, members of the council, staff shares many of the concerns that have been raised, and certainly not wanting to dampen the philanthropic and service commitment of this community. We had planned originally to bring this item forward when we normally bring donation and solicitation items forward, which is during the budget process, which would have been at your May 20th meeting. But because of questions and concerns raised by members of the community and council, and because there is an active private fundraising solicitation campaign underway, we thought bringing it to you earlier made appropriate sense so the council could weigh in. Certainly no action is required by the council tonight. The town does not have authority to restrict or control private fundraising efforts. The town does have authority to accept donations at some point in the future according to the donation and solicitation policy. So when that opportunity represents either at the May budget hearing or subsequent is when this would likely come back to you unless you direct otherwise.
Question would be, given what I think the issue Mr. Leonardis raised, which is that there are a number of community civic groups that have an interest in town properties here. Do you have any input relating to a methodology by which we can coordinate amongst these groups, as opposed to, for example, just not acting on this item and just letting it drop?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. When you reviewed the Veterans Memorial proposal, one of the commitments and direction to staff was to convene interested stakeholders in the deck right above us. And we did a facilitated session on that in January, working with the community outreach coordinator and myself and representatives from all the possible stakeholders to look at the array of opportunities up on that deck. We could similarly do that process for the stage, wherever it might be located. And in fact, one of the conditions we put forward was that outreach had to be done both by Los Gatos Music and Arts and by staff to the Kiwanis Fiesta de Arts, the museums, the library and the Friends of the Library, and the other prospective users of any stage here at the Civic Center. So I would recommend you direct your staff to convene a similar discussion about a potential stage at the Civic Center, be it where the Music in the Park stage has been or elsewhere.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
Just a question regarding process. Even when we ever got to the point where we were discussing a stage, I think Councilmember McNutt brought it up, and also Councilmember or Vice Mayor Leonardis, is location, design. There may be some concern if spaces are used in the downstairs library that light will be blocked by a permanent stage. There may be some maintenance issues. So if the council were interested in making sure that any structure went back through the planning department process and the planning commission process, could we do that?
You could certainly direct that any design go through a design review process at the planning commission. The town would be the applicant in that case, or the entity that is raising the funds and providing the funds would be the applicant and would go through that process. We did try to specify that from staff's limited information to date, the location of the stage would be the same location that is used for Music in the Park currently from June through August for the summer series, and that would be the permanent location. No other location was discussed.
I can't tell. You have questions? Nope. Let me follow up on that. You circle back to your saying we could, we was what you said, we staff could convene a similar meeting with regard to the stage. Right now, my thinking is that may need to be more expansive and be a coordination amongst various groups that want to use the Civic Center. Is staff saying that we separate out the stage from considerations of other groups?
I was focusing on my earlier response just on the stage issue as we had previously on the deck issue when the Veterans Memorial one came forward. Certainly the council could direct staff to either convene or could appoint themselves a broader participant and stakeholder group for the use of the Civic Center. Interestingly, we do have coming back to you, as you saw on a desk item today, use policies for the pageant grounds, and those are other issues that could be taken to a broader discussion. We already have use policies for the Civic Center lawn, but there are many issues that could be brought in. My only hesitancy is the workload dynamic, trying to manage it among all the other priorities the council has already established.
So right now, at play is the stage via this agenda item, the Veterans Memorial as a prior issue. Is there anything else currently at play?
The pageant grounds use policy, we have the new pageant grounds that will be reopening. And as you just learned today in a desk item, we're hoping to bring back to you in May use policies for that new facility.
All right, thank you. Questions of staff? All right, at this point, anyone, I don't have any cards, but does anyone in the audience wish to address us on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public input and look to the council for motions direction. Ms. McNutt, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think we need a motion to do nothing since it was just a conceptual approval, but I would, I think, like to propose a motion to instruct staff to, in consultation with the mayor, to come up with a work plan item that would in some way gather the stakeholders and develop overall policies for use and development of accessories, I'll call them, on the Civic Center campus, so that it's the full campus. And I don't think that would have to be done until summer of 2014, since we're only 2 months away from Music in the Park. Everything else is already, this isn't part of the motion, this is just me talking now. Since we're already, things, the regular activities are very much calendarized and in place. So I could see this not being a rush item at this particular point. Did you get the period as to where the motion is?
I got where the motion ended. It was a staff in consultation with mayor come up with a plan to gather stakeholders for Civic Center accessories. The colloquy after that was anticipated before 2014. But we do have a motion. Is there a second? Ms. Jensen?
I'm prepared to second the motion, but I have a question for the maker of the motion. Did you intend to include the pageant grounds use in your Civic Center campus or not?
Ms. McNutt?
Yes, I would.
I would advocate that, and with that, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And just for clarification, the pageant grounds is going to be coming back to us, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt. Further discussion. Mr. Larson.
The only concern staff might have is the pageant grounds, as I announced earlier, opens on April 20th, and it was our plan to bring back to you policies in May regarding that. Based on the redesign we did last year, we do see a limitation on the nature of events, and I know we're already getting requests for weddings and the like up there, which the park was not designed for. And so we did see a need to bring back those policies sooner, so they could be interim policies pending this longer process that would culminate next January or so.
And that's why I made the reference to the fact that pageant grounds is coming forward. Ms. McNutt?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. As you pointed out, we already have policies for use of the front lawn. We already have policies for use of the library. We have policies for existing uses. So all of that will be all folded in. So I don't see that as being problematic.
All right. Ms. Jensen?
I also don't see it as being problematic, and my question was really directed toward, is pageant grounds included as the Civic Center campus, which I would believe it should be.
And the answer is yes. Further discussion. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would request, since I think we know where the motion's going to go, that the mayor communicate to the individuals who have brought forward the request for the stage and also the fundraising, communicate the nature of the council's discussion so that that's made clear. Assuming that they aren't necessarily watching us right now and to see what our discussion how it concluded. But I think for purposes of fairness, that we do outreach to those individuals so they can be clear where we went with this, and the caveats that we all had regarding where we see the values that were presented.
And as what I would suggest, since the motion is staff with in consultation with the mayor, that at the most reasonably soon mayor-manager meeting, that I would ask the manager to discuss with me or come up with me communications that we can have with these potential applicants. Is that okay? All right, further discussion. Seeing none, hearing none, we do have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now on agenda item 7, pulled by the consent from the consent calendar. Agenda item 7 is height, pole, and netting policy, which included a adoption of a revised height, pole, and netting policy. I believe, Ms. Jensen, you pulled that from the consent calendar. I would ask you the same as I did with Ms. McNutt, if you could please give us your reasons for pulling it, and then I will turn to staff for their response.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I pulled item 7 due to concerns with the proposed policy, also communications we received from the public regarding it, with issues I perceive with that we've heard about tonight with the alternative depiction of height for example, the Albright project. We also received a desk item from staff today in response to one of the questions I was going to ask regarding when would council be notified of any exceptions. So I had some issues with the proposal. I know members of the public had some issues raised in emails we received, so that's why I wanted to pull it for a discussion of those.
Do other council members have anything they want to add before I go to staff? Well, along the lines of questions with regard to this staff proposal, I did have, first of all, quite frankly, I know we're the council, and I know staff was looking to the direction we gave in September of 2012, and I don't think this council gave very clear instructions or direction. But one of my questions from the staff report is how will the council be advised of a manager decision? How will the council respond if it wants to respond? How, if in any way, will the public be advised of this, of what we're doing? And that's all I have for now. I might have more later. Mr. Larson.
First, on the notification process, that was the subject of the desk item, and what staff was simply proposing is that on the Friday following receipt of a request, or actually when community development receives a request for an exception that they believe meets the guidelines of the policy, they would forward that recommendation to me. I would then make my assessment of it, and if I was inclined to approve it, I would notify the council that there is a pending exception request by a certain Friday, whatever is the following Friday, and the council would have till Friday a week later, following your normal council agenda policy and process, for 2 members of council or the mayor to notify that they would like to pull the exception request up for council consideration, as happened a few months ago on the Albright project. The new wrinkle I added based on the question raised was that if a council member were to notify staff orally in either a meeting or a phone call, that there would be a written follow-up to that request, just so that there's always a written record. In terms of the public access, that was an interesting question, and I think when our project information program, which is going to be discussed later on this agenda, is fully operational, that creates a great avenue. In the meantime, there could be a list of pending exceptions in the clerk's office and the community development department lobby. We don't expect that many, so it wouldn't be a list with 10 items. It would be a new exception has been requested, and it would be up for the same period of time. The only additional thought I've had is if we were to extend it to a 2-week notification period to council, that would usually encompass a council meeting, and I could always mention under manager matters that we have received an exception request, and that would be another opportunity. We thought those were operational details that could be implemented, but that the direction from council, based on the discussion a few months ago, would be the council has a chance to weigh in and choose whether or not an exception request should be considered by the council. I think before asking Suzanne to respond to other questions, since we did receive some good public input on this item, it might be good to hear the public comment before asking staff to further respond.
Sure. Does council at this point have any other questions before we turn to the public? Ms. Jensen?
Just to follow up on what Mr. Larson, you just said, if I'm looking at paragraph F, exceptions of the proposed new policy, it says that the town manager will review all justifiable requests for an exception to the story pole requirements within 14 days of receipt of the request, within 10 days of the town manager's decision, et cetera, et cetera. What you just said, what I think I just heard you say is that you will not make a decision pending notification to council and or the public in some fashion prior. So there won't be an exception granted prior to input from public and council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Further questions? All right. We now have public input on agenda item 7. I do have cards on this one, but if anyone else wishes to address us on this item, please fill out a card. First person, John Shepherdson.
John Shepherdson, 120 Oak Rim Way. First, I wanted to thank Vice Mayor Leonardis and Mayor Spector for following up on this issue and really getting it going. Some comments, I've put some of my comments in writing to the council. I know I only have 3 minutes. Also, I want to thank staff and the town manager for their work on this issue. In terms of accountability, a suggestion I have is that perhaps there's a certification from the surveyor or architect involved in the project that in terms of what the story pole plan is and that they've actually implemented it according to that plan. I think that's important in the back end to hold the professionals accountable that in fact what we're seeing is what we should see. I think this is important because we're all visual persons, and what we see is often more striking than what we hear or what we see in some small picture. So I think that story pole policy is very important. I think that the larger the project, the more important that we have this full disclosure with story poles or cranes or something like that. There's kind of a sense that if the bigger the project, maybe we don't have it. I think that we should make every reasonable effort to have story poles, and I think it's more important on these bigger projects because they have bigger impacts on the town and far-reaching, longer-term impacts. In terms of the story pole policy, I'm a bit concerned about depicting density. I'm not sure if the public really understood on the Honda project how dense the units would be. So perhaps on the corners, we have poles of both the corner unit and maybe the units on either side so that the public has an idea of the densities. In terms of acting, I saw something in the policy that talked about acting on the policy, so I would they stay up until it's acted upon. I would suggest it be a final determination, and guess my last thought, because I have 19 seconds here, is to err on the side of full disclosure, because it's kind of insurance to the town council to have full disclosure. Then someone can't come back later and say, I didn't know about it if we put it up. That's it.
Thank you. The only other card I have, because no one else has submitted a card, is Lee Quintana.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. I submitted my comments at 11:14 according to my email record, and I'm sorry that you didn't get it as a desk item. Some of my comments have been covered by the previous speaker. I'm not going to just read my comments, but I would like to emphasize a few items. In particular, the use of cranes. I think I stated in my letter that the use of cranes did not give a good enough impression of the mass and scale and the extent of proposed building, using the Albright Way as an example. Without cranes at all corners of buildings and without netting connecting them, there's really no way that the public can get an idea of the mass and scale and the extent of the intensity of a project. Also, because we're used to seeing netting outlining a full building, having the cranes there does not really provide the public notice that I think is necessary. I'd like to add my support of the online development activities report. I think until that can actually take place, just a listing of projects as they come in would be helpful to the public. The same for the story polls or exceptions to applications for exceptions. I think as they come in, they can be put on the What's New website so the public can be aware of what is happening. Basically, I think this all ties in to basic problem that I think right now the town has been experiencing, as we can see with the public's interest in the gun shop and Albright and Hillbrook and the AHAs, and I'm sure there are a number of other projects that I'm leaving out, that there's, I think, a feeling that the public is not getting full disclosure, and I think that it's important that we start to mend that impression, because it's important that we can trust our government and trust the information that we get from our staff. That's it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ms. Quintana? Seeing none, thank you. All right, I have no more cards. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public input on this matter and look to council for, look to Mr. Larson, because he has a question.
Yes, I did want to just put in the record, I did receive from a member of council at 4:30 a copy of Ms. Quintana's email that was sent to all the council at 11 o'clock this morning, so that will be made part of the public record. Staff didn't have it prior to the 3 p.m. deadline. That's why there were no desk item. I also wanted to clarify the policy does specify what's new would be a point of posting for the any exception requests.
I need to add that I sent a copy to both the clerk and the manager's office at 11.
Quintana, you're out of order. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I am. I just want to correct the record.
All right. Council, I think Ms. McNutt, you were first, and then Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to throw in a couple of other comments since we're talking about this that I had as I reviewed it, and they're both related to communication. The community development online activity report that we had a model in our packet from Cupertino, I liked very much. And in the staff report, it talks about implementing that with
overtime funding. And I was hoping that maybe we could make that a little bit more specific as to when and how that could actually get started. So it would be a really huge task, I imagine, to go back and say everything that's currently in the works and how do we get all of these information sheets compiled and posted. But maybe we could at least set a point in time and say from this date forward, all of these will be put together. I think it would be reasonable to expect the applicant to do a draft of that as just part of the expectation of a major application, so that staff would just have to review it and not create it from scratch. But I do think that would be a very helpful tool for public outreach and education. And then my second part is on the notification cards. I was disappointed that we weren't able to figure out a way to have some kind of illustration on them, since that was my idea. And I don't think that just using a brighter color paper and a 4-color logo is really going to move us very far in the direction of standing out in the mail so that people really pay attention. So I would hope that maybe we could revisit that and look at a larger size card, a use of illustration, whether it's a photo of story poles or a diagram of what's proposed. I'm not exactly sure what would be best, but something that would really pop and not just looks like some bureaucratic communication that it's very easy to pass over.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'd like staff to address the point made by Mr. Shepherdson about the verification, the what we see is what we get. And we had an approach in the revised policy here that said we were going to have our consulting architect, I believe, verify the actual height of the poles.
Certification would typically be done by a surveyor or engineer. It's possible an architect could do it, but typically a contractor or story pole installer is the one that actually puts those poles in place. So it would probably be most appropriate to have a surveyor, somebody that can actually do a true measurement and verify that they are indeed accurate.
So follow-up question would be they would go out and verify and issue a letter to the town?
I would imagine staff would probably create a form that they could complete and sign to simplify that process for applicants. But yeah, we would be looking for something in writing certifying that the poles were installed accurately and that are representative of the height indicated on the plans.
Thank you.
Mr. Leonardis.
One other question. I've heard this concern raised by various people in the community, and that is the density depiction. As I read the report, I agree it's difficult in a plan development to take each and every structure and put story poles up and to illustrate what every building is going to look like. But at the same time, just to mark a corner here and a corner there may not always depict what we're going to expect in the future. So I think moving forward with this, it would be a good idea to, especially for housing developments or whatnot, depict what the density would be in relationship to the other structures. And last but not least, referring to the buff card versus the bright card, I think when you have something in the mail that jumps out at you, we get a lot of junk mail, we all do, and we get a lot of things that look official that aren't, that we put in our recycling bins. But some way to get the public's attention without it looking like a real estate agent or someone marketing to you, without it being maybe the standard buff card, but it's going to require some exploration, and I'm not sure if we can go to other communities and look for examples, but I think anything we can do would help in that regard, because I've heard over and over in my short career up here that I didn't receive a public notice, and I think a lot of that might have to do with, you go over to the trash can or it's caught in between the, newspapers or whatever. But if it's something that jumps out, that would be helpful. So I do wholeheartedly agree with that.
Ms. Jensen.
Several comments along the same lines. I do agree that the online activity report would be very helpful, and I'd like to see that developed as soon as possible. With respect to the notification, I understand the argument that staff makes that it's expensive. However, for the projects that raise the most concern in the community, those are the projects that can afford to put a depiction on a postcard. So I would encourage the town to explore if it's a planned development or a multi-commercial facility or whatever it may be, that's the development that can bear the cost of that notification and should bear the cost of that notification. And so along the same lines, in our proposed policy in F, the first paragraph in F and exceptions, it does indicate the planned development applications with multi-commercial structures and or residential units may also request to erect story poles on the locations where the key structures will be placed. I totally disagree with that. I agree with Ms. Quintana that the reason to have the story poles it's a lot of reasons, but sitting on the Planning Commission, the real reason is for public notice. You don't see a sign that's across the railroad tracks. You don't see a sign. Most people don't go check online whether we'd like them to or not. Using Albright as an example, if you drive past Winchester and you don't know what those cranes are there for, it could be a construction project, it could be window washing, it could be tree trimming, it could be anything. There's really nothing to alert the public to the fact that these are there for a reason to show you a proposed building. So I think that they do nothing for public notice. And I think that planned developments and multi-commercial, they are the applicants that can bear that cost. And if they have to put up a whole lot of netting and a whole lot of poles, so be it, unless there's some public safety concern is where I come from on that. With respect to the policy portion that talks about signs, along the same lines of who could bear the cost, I don't know that we should require an individual property owner for a single-family residence or second-story addition to put up a sign in front of their house. There's a lot of ways for them to go about notifying their neighbors or notifying the interested parties, but a sign in front of their house seems like an added burden and cost that we shouldn't put on an individual. So those are sort of my thoughts. And then I also raised the question of making sure that the exception to the policy is modified in a way that indicates that no decision will be made with respect to an exception prior to public or council input on that.
Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we have to make sure that we understand why we put story poles up at all. And as been indicated, there are multiple reasons. But the fact is the story poles are there to alert the people who will be immediately affected as to a project that's proposed. And therefore, it says, pay attention. If you're interested, pay more attention. The idea of, let's say, density in a particular project is really not going to be determined by what story poles look like as much as it is by the modeling that takes place, the computer graphics, those things that are available to people to actually explore. And I'm a firm believer that we as individuals in our community must take personal responsibility and not just say, no one came to my door and said, wake up, there's something going to go on in your neighborhood. I want to agree with all of the different proposals being made at the dais, but I also want to say it's our responsibility as members of this community to be conscious of what's going on. I can't imagine one person in this town now who isn't aware that the Albright project is going to occur. We have been through this process so long, and it's been so public, and there have been so many things that have been presented out there to the community that we need to, as we are adults looking forward to either being in favor of or opposed to a project, we have to take some responsibility. I have no question that 300-foot limit where everyone is noticed, or perhaps further because we've decided it needs to go further. I know those things get home. But to say, where did they go? Well, they may have gone into the junk mail bin, and that might call out how we present these, how we actually put these in front of our people. I think that if our computer graphics are appropriately displayed on our town website, and the card says go to the site to see the graphic, then at that point I think that's the way for people to go beyond just kind of an outline of a project to what the project's actually going to look like, and then make some kind of conclusion from the story polls to the graphic presentation so that they are informed. So I guess my request is that all of this is good, but we have to realize that we're all adults who are doing this, and we have to hold some responsibility for taking personal initiative to find out more if we need to find out more. So I'm thinking that tonight's discussion is very good. We can tweak some of these things, but that should be the bottom line, is that we're taking responsibility to find out more and being aggressive and being active, and not necessarily waiting to the 11th hour to say, wait a second, I never saw this, because we have plenty of notice that lets us be aware of what's going on.
Further discussion? All right, well then let me weigh in on some of these issues, and because there are so many issues, I don't see this as being necessarily linear and coherent. But issues that came up for me that we need to be very specific on how the council is going to be advised of any exception, whether the council will be advised before the exception is given or after. I think it should be before. And I think the process of the exception being considered should be one of which the public can be made aware. And I don't disagree that the public needs to take some responsibility, but there has to be the information out there that the public can get. I really like the online development website that you located from Cupertino. I thought that was really good. It was good enough so that, I don't really care what Cupertino's doing, but I was, reading what they were doing. I like the bright colored notices. Right now, we get notices that look like this, the buff. And because of where I live, I get them fairly regularly. And when I see them, they do catch my attention. But I think a bright colored one, let's say bright pink, for example, I think that it would catch people's attention more than the buff. I would just say that whatever color is chosen or style is chosen, that it be maintained, so that way there is a anticipation and a reaction rather than changing it all the time. I think having the project plans on it could be good, but it's not as significant to me as having a brighter, eye-catching color. The challenge I see with having the plans on there is it might look like other mailings that we get that are trying to promote something or sell something. As relating to the necessity for CDD overtime in order to do this web page, I understand that staff is going to be coming back in May with that proposal. And quite frankly, this one council person will be looking very carefully as to whether or not we really need overtime, in sense of, is all the rest of the time filled up, or can we pull back on Cupertino's model in order to not make it as difficult. With regard to project identification signs, there was reference here in our report somewhere as to them being extremely helpful. I don't find them to be extremely helpful. They're okay. I did have a question of staff about in this proposed policy. It's stated in the purpose that it was not intended to create a requirement under CEQA. And I'm not a big expert on CEQA, but there is some provision in CEQA where there is an analysis of I guess it was the how the project looks, and to the extent that this is not part of CEQA, is there any possibility that we would be moving current CEQA requirements?
So just as a preliminary matter, story poles are not a requirement under state law to comply with CEQA, so nothing in this policy should increase, that the council does, should increase the state law requirements and policies and guidelines that the state legislature has imposed under CEQA.
I agree, but are we reducing or diminishing or impacting CEQA requirements that currently exist?
With respect to the story pole and netting policy, it's to enhance the visualization of the community so that they understand, as council's pointed out, what's coming, so that they're on notice to do more research. It in no way is intended or as a substitute for the state law requirements to meet to deal with visual impacts of a project, if there are any, under state law.
Thank you. And it was visual impacts was the terminology I was looking for. And then a question for, I guess, Mr. Larson. Does this policy as currently proposed allow for the possibility that there will be nothing orange, no story poles, no cranes, nothing of that type? Because I didn't know if Section G...
Only if an applicant asked for an exception, and they would have to come in with an alternative that would be proposed. I mean, I suppose it's possible an applicant could ask to not install any type of story pole, but that would be part of the exception request.
So there could be a request and a suggestion or recommendation from staff that there would be nothing, no story pole, no crane.
It's hard to imagine that occurring, but the applicant could make that request, and if staff ever felt it was warranted in compliance with this policy with the alternatives being presented, then that would be presented to council to determine if they wish to review that matter.
All right. Well,
there's nothing to be approved by staff without council review.
Well, this council person sitting here tonight does have a challenge with that possibility even being part of our policy. That's all I have. Before I go back to the council, we don't have a motion, but does the staff need a motion? What would the manager like at this point?
The council always has options and discretion before it. You could, right now we're still working off a staff level policy that was adopted many years ago that you reviewed a few months ago with the tightening down of those exceptions pending your review of this policy. We could take your direction, and I'd like to run through some of what I've heard because I think there's been some consensus, there's been some divergence, and there's been some isolated comments, and to make sure staff has direction, because ultimately what you're asking for is changes to the policy as drafted that we would like to bring back to you for consideration. And that's ultimately whether you adopt this until those changes come back or whether you want to hold off on adopting this till the changes come back and you deal with it. That's clearly the council's call.
All right, Mr. Larson, before you do that, because I'm going to ask the council, excuse me, to listen to you and then to weigh in. Okay. So anything else before Mr. Larson? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my understanding that the existing story pole policy is all incorporated into this new policy. Is that correct?
And strengthened considerably.
And strengthened considerably by these new ideas.
Per your
but it's
prior
not
direction.
that this is replacing the existing policy. That one goes away. This is just additions to the existing policy.
The other one is a staff level policy. This is council. That always takes precedence. So, yes, I think you're right. That the prior one is encompassed by this and superseded by this.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, anything else before we have Mr. Larson weigh in? I see nothing. Mr. Larson.
First, I think the most consistent feedback is to strengthen the exceptions review process to ensure timely council notification and opportunity, and to provide more specificity of how that will be done, and to ensure a more publicly transparent process beyond just notification and what's new, which is all that's specified in the policy right now. To, at a minimum, the lists that could be provided at the clerk and the community development, to the online website, to possibly council references during council or planning commission meetings. So that's one area my sense was the strongest council consensus to strengthen that policy and practice in what we bring back to you for both council opportunity and public awareness. Consensus on that? Okay. Number 2 was the online information system. To get that up and usable as soon as possible, we will bring that back as part of the budget. There was will have to be a council discussion on workload and priority and funding to get that done, but that would be done as part of the budget process. That's a second consensus staff direction we've heard. Third, a little bit of divergence on this, but clearly something to strengthen the cards that go out to the public notification cards, ideally to include graphics for the project, at least for the largest projects, was referenced. One member mentioning that didn't want the graphics to detract from the communication and look like advertising or promotion of the project. So that's kind of the third area that I heard discussed most frequently by council. And did we capture your concern correctly, Mayor? Okay. The divergence was density, whether or not story polls should be used as a tool to demonstrate project density. I've heard members speak to that issue on both sides, and if there were a more explicit council direction on that. Before you answer that question, we did hear the comment to get rid of what may appear to be contradictory language in portions of the policy, where we say in a couple places very strongly, corners should be indicated of the project and top peak line or maximum mass and build, but then not avoiding the line referenced by Councilmember Jensen. That looks like it undermined that to some extent. And so clarifying that. So I think we got that direction, but it was using story polls as a project density determinant. I'd like more direction from council on, so we know what to bring back to you.
Is that the only remaining issue? All right. All right, well, I'll weigh in on that quickly. Although density, the portrayal of density, theoretically sounds like it might be a good idea, I do have personal questions as to whether that's realistic. So I don't know if that's realistic. Anybody else want to weigh in on it? Mr. Brzezinski?
Yeah, I really don't think, unless you were creating a model on the site that imitated the density of the project, I don't think that it's actually able to be captured by story polls. That's where that next phase is called out, how the project is graphically presented and open to public scrutiny. That's the issue. How do you then offer our public the opportunity to see the project site as it's actually going to be configured? I think modeling is one way to do that, and certainly computer graphics allows us to do some things that we couldn't have done once upon a time. But that's the next step in the process. It's not going to be captured by story poles and netting.
Vice Mayor?
I will, thank you. I will buy into the computer graphic modeling suggestion of depiction of density, provided, of course, that is surveyed and verified as we described earlier. So,
Ms. McNutt?
And I agree with the mayor that it would look like a maze of orange netting. I think it would be too confusing. And I also want to put in a pitch for old-fashioned modeling because I think sometimes there's a skepticism that computer modeling is fudged a little bit, even though it might be authenticated. But if you have an actual model there on the tabletop, it can really, I think, show perhaps more genuinely what it would look like.
Thank you. I saw Mr. Larson. I'm going to go with Ms. Jensen first.
I actually think a maze of orange netting is the point. If, as Mr. Shepherdson pointed out, if we'd had that at the Honda site or at Bluebird Lane, people would have a much better idea of what we ended up with. I also have to concede that the mayor's point is a good one, that perhaps it's not entirely practical in all cases. I think when you have basically an empty lot like the Honda site, it is practical, or Swanson Ford. But with, for example, the Albright site, I can see where it's not particularly practical, but the idea of putting a structure up at every corner for every building with netting, I think would achieve what I'm talking about, because it's not so much density, as Mr. Larson said for me, it's the public notice of what the project's going to be, which is not, they're not going to get it from a computer model, and they're not going to get it from a sign. So that's why I think more rather than less netting is a good thing.
Mr. Brzezinski.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with my council partner in that once upon a time, and this was back in old planning commission days too, architect would come forward with a model that they would put on that table, just as Councilwoman McNutt indicated. And that allowed the planning commission and the council at that time to be able to see how the structures interfaced with each other. And that would be what probably would be more beneficial, perhaps not quite as high tech, but more beneficial to the visualization of the project as it's going to eventually occur. When you look at netting, and I know there's a project taking place pretty close by, the netting does not show you the architecture. And the netting basically, therefore, cannot give you a sense of how this masses together with other structures as compared to an actual model. And I know that in architecture school, they still teach modeling. And so I would say that that would be one of the vehicles we would use to actually reinforce the computer-aided graphics, to allow our people to become more aware of what's going to actually occur on site.
Thank you. Anyone else on the council before we get to Mr. Larson? All right, then I'm going to weigh in on this density issue. What I'm hearing is that you have a mixture of opinions here, and it may be that when staff comes back and addresses density, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It may be options that are applicable to different scenarios. Mr. Larson.
Mayor summarized one of the points I was going to make, because I had responded to council comments, but there was also some comments raised by Mr. Shepherdson, and one was that I think was picked up by Councilwoman Jensen about scaling our analysis of what's appropriate based on the size of the project. And I think that becomes a judgment call that is made by staff and then by the council when they review any exceptions. But I think that concept could be worked in to the policy as well. And then also, just to be more crystal clear, while it is clear on page 3 under E, story pole plan and public safety, about the plan being prepared and certified by a licensed surveyor, civil engineer, architect, or building designer, we may actually want to move that more prominent and further up into section 3, dealing with the actual plan preparation. So the number C, excuse me, location and numbers. So I think there are some things coming from Mr. Shepherdson's comment that we could try to build in that reflect the council discussion as well.
Thank you. Anything more that staff needs at this juncture? Anything more from, yes, there is, Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you. Alluding to something that Councilwoman Jensen said earlier about individual homeowners and putting signs in front of their homes, I agree that on large developments, the notification signs are probably a better idea, but it could be financially more burdensome for an individual homeowner. I would recommend that if it's, say you have one lot and you're splitting it into 2 or 3 lots, maybe that would be an opportunity to put up a sign. But if you're just an individual homeowner doing a remodel on your house or tearing down everything but the front wall or whatever, I think the story poles would be sufficient and not necessarily requiring signage for that.
And Ms. Jensen.
2 items, Madam Mayor, that I didn't hear addressed. One was the mayor's point regarding the possibility that G in our proposed policy seems to allow for no netting, no cranes, or no poles. I would like to make sure that that is not a possibility, that there should be some visual depiction. Mr. Larson also spoke about should the council adopt the policy that we have in front of us now pending the modifications we're asking for. I would say no, because I would not want to have an adopted policy that is not what the council wants.
Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski.
I would like to agree with Councilwoman Jensen on that, on both points, that there should be some way. Again, if the story poles are for purpose really to alert the public, then there should be some way to do that in all cases. And then exceptions would be based on the extent to which they are developed or the alternatives, but it's alternatives as supplementing the story poles that are in place. And then as far as the issue that the Vice Mayor raised, I do think that the individual residential proposal can easily be understood so long as the property and the plans for that property are made available to the public, so that the story poles are in effect the sign that indicates what is, that there is something coming forward, and that access to the plans will be made public or made available at the appropriate time.
And I agree with Mr. Brzezinski and Ms. Jensen on all the issues they've just raised, and Mr. Leonardis. Anything further? I'm going to go back to you, Ms. McNutt.
I'm just thinking through on this residential, and the concern I have is I can understand the sensitivity if it's a second-story remodel or something, but if it's an undeveloped lot that's going into a single-family home, it seems like maybe there needs to be some signage there, because it's not like they can go up and ring the doorbell and say, so what are you guys planning on doing? So I think some notification in that case where they can at least know who to call. Most people don't know where we are or what the phone number is, or the website for that matter. I think on undeveloped lots it should still be in there.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So alluding to what Councilmember McNutt, the point she just raised, and something that Councilmember Brzezinski said, perhaps we can just put, rather than a fancy sign showing the elevation and the beautiful home that will be there someday, a notice of where one can go to the Community Development Department and look at the plans. Simple stake in the ground with a public notice on it. Something is coming.
Further discussion? Looks like we're running out of ideas. Mr. Larson, anything further you need?
I think we got the additional items that had been raised by only one member have now been raised by a consensus. So that provides the direction we need. And just to make sure we've captured it, there was consensus on, not unanimity, but direction to eliminate the sign requirement for at least remodels or added structures, if not for new structures. The desire to make sure there is no complete exception to any physical representation of height on the property, and to make sure G is not interpreted, section G is not interpreted that way. And I believe those were the additional issues that were brought forward.
Thank you. Council? Seeing none, and thank you all. So this item is now completed. All right, now we're actually getting into public hearings. Agenda item 8, adopt resolution approving the comprehensive fee schedule fiscal year 2013-14 to continue certain department fees, rates, charges, and increase certain fees, rates, and charges for fiscal year 13-14 and establishing a fine to allow enforcement of Town of Los Gatos Town Code Section 1540-275 parking in alleys restricted to loading or unloading. The staff report will be done by Steve Conway, Administrative Services and Finance Director, and Jennifer Callaway, Budget Manager. And in fact, it's going to be done by Jennifer Callaway, Budget Manager.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'll keep my comments brief tonight. You have the staff report in front of you along with the desk item related to the pageant grounds use fee. This is the proposed comprehensive fee schedule for fiscal year 13-14. Fees are established by the town in order to recover costs, and you'll see in attachment 3 to the staff report. The first part of the attachment is the list of fees we're proposing to increase by CPI. This is an annual adjustment. This year it's 2.7%. And again, that's really just to keep up with the current costs of providing the services to the residents. And these are primarily related to development services. There's a few fee increases for police as well. Also in attachment 3 are the recommended modifications. These are development services, library, parks and public works, and police fees. And again, this really is to just clarify current fees that we had, and also to make sure that they are aligned with current operational and construction costs. Finally, in the staff report, you'll note that there was one new fee proposed. This is really to give our parking citation officers the ability to enforce a current code and section in our town code, which prohibits parking that's restricted in alleyways for loading and unloading purposes. So if you have any other questions regarding this or the desk item, we'd be happy to answer that for you.
Questions for Ms. Callaway? I see none. And just to clarify with you, there is a charge in there noted for pageant grounds. And as I understand it, there will be a charge, but what can actually occur as an event on pageant grounds is still under development by staff to be brought forward to the council.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Thank you. All right, no other questions. This is a public hearing. Does anyone want to address us on this agenda item? I have no cards. All right, please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue, and this won't take 3 minutes. It's just a question.
Just give us, give us your name, please.
I did.
Sorry.
That's okay. My question is, do traffic mitigation fees come under this, or are they something separate? Can you answer that?
Thank you. And just because the process is you give us information, and then we'll see if it's going to be addressed at this point or not.
Okay, so I guess my information is, as a member of the public, I would like to know that information.
Okay, thank you. Staff have any response at this point?
Director Capurso will respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Manager. Traffic mitigation fees are not included in the fee schedule that you have before you tonight. Hello. Traffic mitigation fees are not included in the fee schedule that you have tonight, and those are being reviewed separately. We have a comprehensive review of those going on a separate track, and you may have those before you sometime next fiscal year.
And when you say sometime next fiscal year, you're talking about sometime between July 1st, 2014 and June 30th, 2014?
Yes, but I can narrow that down. Our goal is to get those back to you before the end of this calendar year. So it would be in the first half of next fiscal year, sometime between July 1st and December 31st of 2013.
All right. On behalf of the council and the public, thank you. Anybody else addressing us on this agenda item? See no one. I'll close the public portion and look to the council. Mr. Przynski.
Madam Mayor, I would be willing to move to adopt the resolution before us contained in attachment 1.
Is there a second? Mr. Leonardis.
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. On to agenda item 9. Agenda item 9 is an update on code compliance policies and practices. As I see, the staff report will be provided by Todd Capurso, the Acting Director of Community Development. Mr. Capurso.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Good evening, and before I get started tonight, I just wanted to point out to you that I may call on assistance from a couple folks on staff, and so the two people I would most likely call upon would be somebody that you're already familiar with, the Acting Assistant Director of Community Development, Sandy Bailey, but I'm not sure that you all know our building official, Mr. Michael Machado. So if you haven't met him before, there he is, and with that I will get started. I'm still awaiting the screen to fill up.
And maybe why that is happening, just to clarify on the last item you acted on, that was the resolution was attachment 1 and the fees and charges was attachment 2, the comprehensive listing, just to be clear on the action.
That was, and it was included in the motion and the second.
So as the screen comes up, I will go ahead and get started because I was going to talk over the title slide anyway. My main goal tonight is to provide an update regarding the current state of the town's code compliance program and give council the opportunity to ask questions and provide additional direction for the program moving forward into a new fiscal year. And boy, does that screen look green. I don't know where that came from, but it's not St. Patrick's Day anymore, but somehow it looks like green on green. And that's not what I have, so I apologize for that. This discussion goes back to September 2012 when a study session was first requested by council. This came about mainly because there was increasing neighborhood concerns that led to a specific request by council. The purpose of the study session was to discuss policy, not any specific issue that was being discussed, any specific neighborhood issue or complaint at the time. To help set the stage, it might be helpful to revisit what is included in our definition and is the most typical definition of code compliance. It includes building codes, including health and safety issues, planning permits, including, most notably including CUPs, and neighborhood issues that may or may not include any of those two, but are usually related to the zoning code. Before getting into the current status of the program, I'd like to provide a little additional background and history. Once upon a time, the town did have a full-time code compliance position that was on staff through approximately 2008. At that point, that position became vacant and it was eliminated as part of the 2009-10 operating budget. The duties were then split among multiple positions in community development. Staff was as responsible as they could be, but these issues often took a second priority to their primary responsibilities. All through this, though, the basic philosophy of the program did not change: to focus on complaint-based enforcement, focus on compliance, and we can abate enforcement pending progress toward a positive resolution. Over the last 2 years, there have been approximately 600 complaints that have come into our code compliance office. Most of these are related to building code and other zoning codes. These are usually fairly routine, but do require a fair amount of follow-up and constant monitoring over a long period of time. The more complex issues typically involve noise, especially if it is after hours, and conditional use permits. These often require research and at least some level of interpretation and continued monitoring by staff. These also have a greater potential for weekend or after hours complaints, so they really cannot be immediately addressed by community development staff, but often involve after hours police calls and responses. The prior council direction coming out of the study session, council provided staff with the following set of instructions: to restore some level of dedicated resources, to pursue staff-initiated enforcement where appropriate, to allow a maximum of 60 days abatement period where appropriate. This would be most applicable to building codes than things like noise issues, and there was some discussion about the appropriateness of when we would use this and when we wouldn't. To research a complainant appeal process, and to increase access, outreach, and community engagement. There we go. I've gone too far now. Okay. So where are we with that prior direction? We have implemented the dedicated staffing. It is currently a combination of in-house and contractual resources that provides for service 4 days per week in code compliance. This was done in approximately October and was included in the mid-year budget review. Continuing this will be addressed as part of the 2013-14 operating budget, and we will most likely propose this to continue at the same level that we've been doing for the last 6 months. One benefit, although I talked about the downside of having the duty split among several staff in the past when the positions were vacant, one benefit of having the duty split for the extended period of time is that it has increased the level of awareness for staff who fulfilled that role over that time. So now we have this increased level of awareness that is among the rest of the building staff, particularly our building inspectors who are out in the field, not to mention our park service officers who are regularly out in the field, such that when they witness an instance where something is out of code, they can now pass it along to the appropriate staff and it can be dealt with. But what the dedicated resources do allow us to do is to, they allow for increased consistency and timeliness and follow-up, which is something that we were lacking by the dedicated resources. The in-progress efforts, we are currently working on uploading the CUPs onto the website. Although this has been labor-intensive, this is actually the easier part. The difficult part of that task will be the monitoring and scheduling work. Each CUP will need to be reread, and understood as to what the requirements would be, particularly if there are reporting requirements that have been placed on the applicant. This portion of the work, unlike some of the other issues I've spoken of earlier, will most likely need to remain in the planning division as opposed to the building division. The priorities for uploading the CUPs and understanding the schedules will likely be in and around the downtown core. That's where we have experienced the largest number of CUP interpretation issues. However, as other issues come up throughout town, we would certainly want to hit those areas as well. I mention that because it's not likely that we can interpret all of the CUPs as in one fell swoop. There'll have to be some level of prioritization. And we're also finding that some of the older CUPs are far less descriptive than we would like them to be, and really don't tell us much. So you sometimes have to go back and get the verbatim minutes of the Planning Commission at the time to find out what the real discussion was around those. We have also improved our access and responsiveness. Phone calls and emails are addressed on an almost daily basis, and the website and printed materials are currently being reviewed and updated as well. The issues still needed for follow-up, where we haven't been able to make a lot of progress since the study session, would be to confirm that the abate or suspend the enforcement efforts up to 60 days when tangible progress is being made. However, we have not yet defined what the appeal process would look like for every scenario. And for proposed use permit changes, compliance would be required prior to consideration of amending the permit. Finally, what would be the appropriate mediation or appeal mechanism? At the study session, it was suggested that the Planning Commission could be the body could be the appeal body for conditional use permits. But for other code compliance issues, we might look to third-party mediation if they are specific neighborhood issues. However, either of those scenarios would be likely to have a financial implication to at least one, if not both parties. So those are the issues that still need a little more definition on our part. And with that, concludes the staff report. We are happy to answer questions, and we are asking council to provide any additional direction and additional information to staff as appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Capurso? Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Capurso. I had a question regarding number 2 on our staff report, page 3. These are recommendations that are summarized. It talks about test new proactive code enforcement procedures, and I'm really unclear about what the implications of that are and what you mean. And it seems that it's limited to downtown, but it's not clearly specified. So can you explain that for me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. What that typically means, well, what a typical instance of that would be is when the code compliance officer approaches a business that could be in the downtown area about signage, or this actually could apply to neighborhood issues as well. One of the first responses that you typically receive is, yeah, I know I've got this sign, or I know I've got this vehicle, but there's another one of those right down the block. And so the proactive enforcement is to ensure some level of uniformity so that it doesn't look as though a single business or residence would be singled out. We wouldn't necessarily do proactive above that, but once an issue has been discovered in a particular area, our goal would be then to apply that uniformly. Even if the complaint was to a particular business or residence, we would then expand that.
Other questions?
There was also council discussion at your last session about potential proactive enforcement downtown, and so we've identified that issue. In particular, the prior council discussion was about mobile signs or sandwich board-like signs, as well as overseating in restaurants. And we've identified if the council wants us to pursue that, then we would identify that in the proposed budget, including a communication plan to notify all downtown businesses before any proactive enforcement started.
All right, and thank
if
you.
The council wants us to do it.
Mr. Capurso, page 4, paragraph 6.
Rather than me reading the whole thing, what is this?
This is a very nice way of telling you that our web pages need updating, and I think many of you already know that. I'm surprised I didn't get that question from this end of the dais. So we're working on that effort right now to ensure that our web pages and our printed materials are up to date. That is one of the first things that falls off the radar when you're trying to fill this role essentially by committee. So now that we've got some dedicated resources and people are able to put in the time that the program really warrants, we're just trying to make sure everything we have is as current, has the correct call numbers, has the correct contact information, and looks as clean and as modern as we would like it to be.
Thank you. Ms. McNutt. Now she's going to ask you.
No, I'm going in a different direction. Do you know about how many CUPs there are?
I do not, but I'm going to look over my shoulder very slowly. We don't know. We haven't discovered the full amount in my conversations with planning staff. There are probably some CUPs that we have yet to discover. But as I say, the older ones, the older ones that we find, the less descriptive that they are.
I'm
And
sorry,
I know that doesn't help you.
Is a lot 500 or is a lot 2,000?
My guess would be 500 as opposed to 2,000. I'm getting a nod on that.
Okay, so my concern is on page 4 in your recommendation number 4, a biannual basis review of each CUP. So it's every 6 months, somebody would look at 500 or whatever CUPs. Is that A, even possible, and B, even more importantly, is it warranted to do that level of scrutiny? I mean, we've had some CUP issues that have been high profile and problematic, but that's less than 10 or 12 out of 500. So are we setting ourselves up here to go way overboard and start allocating far more resources than we need to solve mostly a problem that may not exist?
Well, I believe that we need to put the resources in to make all of the CUPs publicly accessible. And that will be a large piece of work, there's no doubt about it. But our goal is not necessarily to have each CUP reread every 2 years. It would be more like as you read and comprehend that CUP, we need to identify the items that are open for annual or biannual review. And not every CUP has those items. There are some CUPs that speak to the entity providing the town certain types of information every 6 months or holding a community meeting periodically. Those are the ones that we would put onto a calendar and hit those periodically. And there's no doubt. Your other point is a very good one in that not all 500, if that number is even close, 500 CUPs are causing issues. So there'd have to be some prioritization where you need to spend your time where you can provide the largest benefit back to the community.
And so if I can just clarify, because the way I was reading this, it made it sound as if every CUP was going to be looked at biannually, which I think is every 6 months. Not biannually. So.
Yeah, not biannual as opposed to biennial. We've had that discuss, and I learned something on that. I meant once every 2 years, and next time I will say it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Ms. McKnight, is that it for now? All right. Okay, other council people? All right, Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On page 2, Mr. Capurso, under the existing enforcement process, you talk about this Project Sentinel mediation service. How would that work?
Project Sentinel is it's a community mediation service that most of us are familiar with for rental disputes.
Right.
So I know our building official, Mike Machado, has been in contact with them to discuss how it could be implemented on this type of instance, and I believe they have experience with this, but I will turn to Mr. Machado and see if he can provide us additional information.
Thank you, Todd. Project Sentinel typically does mediation for rental disputes, but they also serve the communities of City of Los Altos, Palo Alto, and Mountain View, excuse me, in mediating neighborhood disputes. And they can do it on a case-by-case, about $500 a case. They develop a case, and the parties need to agree to voluntary mediation, willingly participate. May not come to a resolution, but it's time to air out what the issues are.
All right, so I appreciate that, Mr. Machado. So let's assume we've gone through a mediation. There still is some conflict because sometimes mediation doesn't lead to resolution. What would be the next steps in the process at that point then?
Well, as I stated earlier, and you probably noticed in this presentation, we consistently refer to the program as code compliance as opposed to code enforcement, because our number one goal is compliance.
Right.
So there does come a point in some instances or in some disputes where you have to go to enforcement, and you have to start exhausting all legal means that you have before you. In which cases we would work with our town attorney and our police department, because in some instances, if they become extreme, those are the only means that you have available to you. The goal of the mediation would be to identify the issues, because it's quite common that, I'll use the term, the offending party is not really fully aware of the issues that they cause to their surrounding neighborhood and the impacts and consequences that they cause to their neighbors. So by airing those concerns, you can often increase the level of awareness with the offending party that I really do need to get those vehicles off the street, or I really do need to clean up my yard. But when those means don't work, there's a much stronger level of enforcement that we can take on at that point.
All right, so basically it brings the actual enforcement pool down to a smaller contingent. Okay.
That would be the goal, yes.
All right.
Mr. Brzezinski?
If I might, then, if you would look at number 7 on page 4. My question on that, and this is a reflection on the woodshed issue that we just experienced. We could not abate planning and permitting issues without council concurrence. My question is, what triggers a response from council? How is it that the council is included in the process if staff is out there attempting to get compliance, and in the woodshed case, there seemed to be no opportunity for staff to make a judgment call at its level before it got downstream to kind of a public concern that bounced back to council. Is there any mechanism in our process, or should we investigate a mechanism whereby there can be judgment made at staff level for some abatement when it seems to be obvious or common sense that this would be appropriate at this time?
That is a very good point, and I believe that that is what our goal would be. So anytime we have an instance where you've got a certain level of impacts on the community that may be perceived or may be real, it would be our job as staff to kind of weigh that against the actions that are being taken. The interesting thing about something like the woodshed, and if I can use that example again, is that it generated a lot of emails and direct contact with council. And so that is one of the benefits of working in a small community, working and living in a small community, is that people have the access to council. And so the applicant or a neighborhood group, depending on which side you are of the issue, will always have that ability to take something to council, and then if council chooses, it can be agendized. Our goal would not be to undermine that, but our goal would be that if we catch those issues before council do, we would not want to elevate every issue to the council level, so you wouldn't have to weigh on every time we're going to abate enforcement. But I think there will be times when you either have an applicant or a neighborhood group that feels strongly about an issue, and they may bring it to council or get council's attention such that it gets agendized.
Mr. Brzezinski?
That's kind of a reflection on what we just experienced. And I would be more than interested in seeing how we could evaluate a staff response that could, in effect, forestall the full public outcry, and validate the fact that in our government, particularly our government size, that we can respond more quickly to issues that are surfacing that we may see by judgment on staff's part. Could be in some ways evaluated at the staff level, and notice that until such time as we get a council weigh-in, that we can go ahead and abate enforcement, because common sense is telling us this really doesn't make any it's not something that is really going to be problematic. That doesn't exclude the council, but I do think that the staff at its level and with the degree of expertise that is evident should have some flexibility to make those kinds of judgments, and maybe we should explore some mechanism to make that happen.
Ms. Jensen.
I had not questions but comments, so if there are people that would like to discuss this, I would hold my comments.
Yeah, hold the comments right now. I'm just questions of staff. Mr. Capurso, let's talk about CUP violations. And so staff is made aware of CUP violations. I actually don't know what our last direction to you was, but it seems to me that we were probably looking at staffs looking into the situation for a defined amount of time, and then what happens? Because I was thinking the issue would go to the Planning Commission, but where are we now on that?
Well, that's one very good reason why we're back tonight, because at the study session, I think that issue was only mentioned by one, perhaps two council members at most, is that was the recommendation, that for CUP issues, they would first be evaluated by staff, much in the same manner as the instance that we just discussed. So if a complaint came forward from a neighborhood or from a specific neighbor, and it had to do with a particular business, the first thing staff would do would be to evaluate the actions taking place and compare that to what's allowed by the CUP. If staff finds, however staff determines whatever interpretation is made, I suppose either side would have an appeal right. And I use that term very loosely because complainants don't currently have an appeal right. So you have an applicant who, so if we interpreted a CUP in such a way that the applicant or the holder of the CUP thought it was too restrictive, that party would theoretically then have the right to have it agendized for the Planning Commission, and we would have to take the Planning Commission's interpretation and move forward. What's less clear is what rights do the complaining party have, and I suppose that's one of the things that we're looking for additional direction from council tonight, because that's currently not something that is very well defined for us.
Thank you. Other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Capurso. This is a public hearing, and I do not have any cards on this agenda item 9. Does anyone wish to address us on this? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public portion of the hearing and then turn to the council for motions, directions. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not prepared at this time to make a motion, but I have some comments regarding some of the items that were discussed, starting with the appeal rights. We do have, I would urge us to consider amending our town code to specifically allow that. So, for example, we have section 29.20.255, paren 1, which specifically gives any interested person the right to appeal a decision of the planning director denying the granting of a certificate of use and occupancy, but it doesn't give the right to someone to appeal the granting of a use. So it's the same issue you were just discussing. With respect to...
Before you, are you going on to something else?
It's the same issue.
All right.
With respect to when you get higher up in, I'm going to say, the food chain, for lack of a better term, 29.20.310 gives the planning director or the planning commission the ability to cause a hearing for modification or revocation of a CUP, but no one else. So I would suggest we consider modifying the town code to allow a member of the public or a complaining party. We just need to be more inclusive in how these get reviewed. So that's point number one, and I have several. So if you want me to stop with the review process, I can stop there.
No, go ahead.
Let's see. The mediation, I have no issue using that with building permits, signs, etc. And most of my comments are directed toward CUPs. I don't think that would be productive in a CUP context. We have an example of that not being productive, and I think eventually it will come back before the Planning Commission or the Council, so I think we've wasted time and resources to do that, and I wouldn't like us to see us do that. And I'm not keying this to recommendations in our report, I apologize, but with respect to staff monitoring of compliance with CUPs, I think that's fine, except for what was identified with the woodshed example, which wasn't, of course, a CUP. And I think that what happened with the September 4th study session is that maybe staff was too draconian in saying always this, never this, and not exercising discretion, as Councilmember Persinski said, in identifying when to shut something down. So the problem wasn't that we were abating enforcement, it's that we just went in and enforced quickly. So some suggestions I'd make regarding the exercise of discretion would be to extend the time period, perhaps to 90 days, that there should be no, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say shutting things down, absent 5 or more complaints, none of which could be anonymous, absent an existing identified violation of a CUP, and that all of the means to resolve the issue have been exhausted. And I think that the first step would be then to take it to perhaps DRC with bigger issues, Planning Commission, because after all they set the CUPs, for example, so that's the appropriate forum as far as I'm concerned, and then eventually to Town Council. So those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be interested to see what kind of language staff comes up with regarding this idea of the challenge or the appeal rights. And what I'm concerned about is, I'm trying to think of a good, hypothetical situation here. A business has a CUP. There is a feeling on the part of that they're staying open later than they're allowed to. That comes before, it's investigated. That's not a good example. I'm not going to give you an example. What I'm concerned about is that to be very clear, that if someone is challenging the decision on compliance with CUP, that there's not an expectation that that CUP is now open and fair game for starting over from scratch. Because as I understand it, it's a vested right until they choose, whoever the holder of the CUP, until they choose to want to modify it. So if they're not wanting to modify it and it's just a question of compliance and that's been investigated, I'm not sure where this process is going to go, and it could easily get people really with the expectation that they're going to be able to change something that is pretty much set and not changeable, as far as I understand the legal. So it'll be interesting, as I said, to see what kind of language you can come up with, or a process that would allow for that extra opportunity for residents to have another part of the process, but without jeopardizing what's a legal right.
All right, further comments by council? Hold on, please. Council? Ms. Jensen.
Just to pick up on what Councilmember McNutt just said, one alternative which used to be employed regularly and which could serve as an alternative is that when Planning Commission or Town Council or whoever set the conditions of approval for a particular project, that project was scheduled back on the agenda for Planning Commission either at 6 months or a year for regular review. And that would provide a forum for people to come in and make their complaint, make their compliment, do whatever they wanted to do. And now there is a public process in place where we don't have to have the concern that's raised by Councilmember McNutt. We simply have a process for reviewing it at a particular time.
Thank you for the discussion. I haven't forgotten you, Mr. Larson, but going through, there were a lot of issues raised in the staff report. And by the way, I want to thank staff for all of these procedural staff reports. This is not like fun and games, but thank you. Starting with, for me, with the CUP or assertions or allegations of CUP violations conceptually, and I think this is what we said last time. I believe that they should be investigated by staff. I think there should be a finite amount of time. I think before we said 30 to 60 days. Ms. Jensen said 90 days. I'm not so much fixated on whether it's 30 or 90 days in that it has a defined amount of time. And at that point, I do think that it needs to come up to a public process. And I initially agreed with Ms. Jensen that it be the Planning Commission, because that's what I have in my notes also. I do appreciate what Ms. McNutt was saying, and so the issue being brought forward to the Planning Commission or reviewing body would have to be defined and limited. Next concept here, you have the fact that you're going through the CUP posting on our website. I think that's really good. On mediation, I would not do mediation. I mean, I like mediation. I'm a mediator. I think it could be really good. But I would not do things as substantive as a CUP violation under mediation. I would do it with lesser violations or alleged violations. And then with regard to the woodshed, I think we have to separate nice guys from process. There was a complaint about the woodshed. Do I think that staff should act on it when it is a contingent violation? Probably not. But when it becomes a real violation, it should be explored. And then when it is determined that it is indeed a zoning violation or some kind of an ordinance violation, once again, I think staff should attempt to rectify it, resolve it, and if it doesn't, again, in X amount of time, it needs to come to some body. And what I'm saying is that you can't say, that's a nice business and that's a nice guy, so we're going to blink. But this business we don't like so much, and this guy we don't like so much, so we're not going to blink. So I believe that we need a process, and I believe that process needs to be defined and applied by staff equally to everybody. Now, before we get to council, Mr. Larson, you've been waiting.
Actually, the subject I was going to raise was addressed, so I'm good.
All right, council further? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're faced with an issue of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And Councilwoman Jensen used the term draconian. I think there is within government process an opportunity to not decide on the basis of this is a nice guy, this is a nice business, we're going to not pay attention, but we don't like this one, we don't like the way they're doing business, so that's the one we're going to pay attention to. That should not be an issue. The issue should be, what is it we're trying to deal with, and what's its real impact? Not just from letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law. What's the intent of the law? And I think that we found ourselves in a situation where you had one anonymous complaint based on parking, and our immediate response was shut it down. And I think that there is where we may have an opportunity to reevaluate what is the process that occurs at a point where we're making judgments that could theoretically allow us to be more flexible at points where we don't see something that's going to have significant harm. And I don't think it's a question of picking and choosing our battles. I think it's a question of just making good judgments about those things that are having an impact and then acting accordingly. Again, this is an area I'd like us to explore to see what could we do that would be more beneficial. I think that this is a good opportunity, since we just had this experience, to see what could be possible for us out there as we look at this process we're going through.
Thank you. Further discussion by council? Mr. Larson, back to you. Do you have any questions? Do you have a sense of direction?
The staff report was primarily an update. There were only a few action items we put before the council, plus providing it as an opportunity to you to give clarified direction to staff. One issue that was raised was on kind of the discretion for staff to abate enforcement on permit and planning issues. There's been a lot of discussion, some council divergence on that, and staff will continue our work of looking at other jurisdictions, what are the best practices they've set up to deal with this. I really appreciate Councilwoman Jensen's specific standards that could be used to help make those judgments, to take it out of the nice guy, not a nice guy discretion, which I don't think is appropriate to give staff. And so I think we will look for best practices elsewhere. We have several items that will come back to you in the budget process. We do need to better explain to council and the public the existing appeals processes that exist for both planning and CUP violations, as well as more traditional kind of lower level down the food chain code enforcement violations. And I think that'll be the next part of our communication process. We are still looking for third-party appeal processes, and we have not found those yet in other jurisdictions. We raised that as a prospect to you on September 4th, and that's something we'll continue to look at. The one remaining issue that wasn't discussed much by council, other than a question, was proactive enforcement and how high of a priority that is for you. It was pretty important at the September 4th discussion. We've laid out to you two areas we thought we could explore it in the next fiscal year. One was the adjacent violators of the same issue, the nearby, what did we call it, nearby compliance, to seek nearby compliance of the same violation. If we get a complaint on Party A about an abandoned vehicle and there's one 2 doors down, we get that at the same time. The more challenging one is issues raised by the public, Planning Commission and Council regarding downtown signage and downtown seating. Do you want us to bring back a proposal to pursue more proactive enforcement after a communication program there? Or not?
I'll just weigh in on it. I mean, when you say bring it back to us, bring it back to us at the budget, bring it back to us at a council meeting?
Budget.
I'll see what other people think. I mean, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I don't think we should say no way, never, but I don't have a strong feeling. Other council members? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. I would revert back to Mr. Capurzo's original comments, focus the resources putting the CUPs online.
Thank you. All right, staff need anything further? Mr. Capurzo?
Thank
Mr.
you.
Larson? Thank you both very much. All right, we've been very diligent, so we're going to give Sandy Bailey a 7-minute break. And we'll be back in 7 minutes. Calling the meeting back to get order. It looks like all of our audio visual is good to go. We are on agenda item 10, review of downtown parking assessment district. Our staff report will be made by Sandy Bailey, planning manager. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Mayor Spector and council members. Before I begin, I just want to let you know that there is a desk item on this matter. I believe we may have inundated you with the history of the parking assessment district, and I'm not going to go over tonight the full history of the district. What I'm going to do is to provide a very, hopefully a very brief summary, summarizing various issues. So in regards to the overview, I'll first go over the background as to why we are here tonight. The parking credits for expansion, new development, and intensification use, and then discuss the mitigation options that were looked at for properties that were underestimated regarding their existing square footage in the district. And in regards to 41 North Santa Cruz Avenue, discuss that site when the parking assessment district was created, the earthquake restoration process it went through, and the recent CUP approval that it received. And then finally, I will talk about the future of the assessment district. Well, the reason why we are here tonight is on February 19th, 2013, in response to public inquiries regarding the Los Gatos Theater application, Council directed staff to provide an informational report regarding the downtown parking assessment district, the historic applicability of district standards, and the requirements for expansions and new developments within the district. In regards to parking credits, there are 4 categories for, I'm trying to go through here, I think I missed something. There are 4 categories in determining the existing use and on-site parking. The categories are retail, office, restaurant, and residential. In terms of residential, the properties that had residential uses were not assessed for that residential use, but it was important to get that information for 2 reasons. One is we needed to know that they had a residential use, and then also we needed to know what the square footage was, because the square footage was required to determine the floor area ratio for the site. In regards to the maximum floor area ratio, the town code for new construction allows a maximum floor area ratio for properties in the parking assessment district, a floor area ratio of 0.60. It's important to note that there are several properties within the parking assessment district that do exceed the floor area ratio of 0.60, so those are non-conforming and they are grandfathered in. When the district was created, for those properties that did not have a floor area ratio, it was less than 0.60. Property owners had an opportunity to pay into the parking assessment district to build up to a floor area ratio of 0.60. Not all property owners took advantage of this opportunity. For those owners that did take advantage of this opportunity, they were allowed to intensify their use up to 0.60. They could do that by adding the additional square footage, or if it was a vacant lot, then they could construct up to 0.60. Another thing that they could do they didn't have to increase their square footage, but they could use it to intensify the use. So if they had a restaurant, they could instead use that extra parking to increase the number of seats in their restaurant. Or if it was like a yoga studio, they could increase the number of students and or instructors at the yoga studio. As noted in your report, the square footages that were reported when the parking assessment district was created, those were all estimates. Staff used aerial photographs, building permits to come up with an estimate of the square footage. Property owners were encouraged to provide input regarding those calculations. The town code states that the creation of the district relieves those properties located within the district which are nonconforming as to parking from having to supply on-site parking. Once the district was created, there was a formula. Once that formula was set and the assessments were made, the district was basically locked in. There was no way that you could go in and change that assessment. Therefore, the district is inflexible in amending or adding credits, and that was noted in numerous reports I could find regarding the parking assessment district. Since the town code states that the district properties do not have to provide on-site parking and that there is no direction on how to handle corrections to the estimates, if the town came upon a property that underestimated their square footage, the town historically has not required those properties to provide on-site parking for their existing floor area if they did not have room to do so. The town also didn't require them to pay additional funds into the parking assessment district for their existing square footage, since, as I mentioned, there was no mechanism to allow that. And the town has not required those properties to remove the excess square footage, because that kind of goes in the opposite direction of economic vitality, and that would be a hardship for the property owner as well as the business owner to require them to remove that excess square footage. So this brings us actually to why we are here tonight. This is a chart that is in your report regarding 41 North Santa Cruz Avenue, and I want to point out that the chart is not just for the theater. There's also a retail space in that building. So I'm going to refer this to 41 North Santa Cruz Avenue, not the theater, because there are two uses here. In 1984, when the parking assessment district was created, the square footage that was estimated, and again I emphasize estimated, was 7,732 square feet. The parking ratio for the theater was used as a retail use, and that ratio is one parking space for every 300 square feet. So that equates to 26 parking spaces. In 1991, this was after the Loma Prieta earthquake, the property owner went through the earthquake restoration process for a conditional use permit. There was two reasons for the use permit. One was that the theater, due to the earthquake, had been closed for over a year, and technically by town code that meant the CUP was no longer valid. So they wanted to reinstate their conditional use permit. And the other reason was that the property owner or business owner wanted to take this opportunity to revise the theater. And so they were looking at converting the one-screen theater into 2 screens or potentially 3 screens. The report regarding this earthquake restoration process noted that the square footage was an estimate, and that estimate was 9,230 square feet. There was no discussion in that report that regarding the parking assessment district, that this square footage was over what was estimated in the 1984 calculations. But the report did state that the project was not an intensification of land use because there was no increase in seating. The seating remained the same. So parking was not an issue. In 2012, the current applicant for the theater came in to modify their use permit because they wanted to allow special events in conjunction with the service of alcoholic beverages. At this time, the current applicant had a detailed measurement done. Technology is a lot better now, so they can get more detailed in measuring square footage. And they came up, not with an estimate, but an actual calculation that the square footage is 9,530 square feet. And so in comparing the parking ratios here, in 1984, the required parking was 26 spaces. In 1991, if it was determined at that time that there was an intensification of use, or if there should have been an assessment made for the additional required parking, it would have been 5 spaces. In recent 2012, if there was that same determination, the required parking would be 6 more spaces than what was in the parking assessment district. However, it's only 1 more space than what was approved in 1991. In regards to the recent application, it was again determined that the application that was proposed was not an intensification of land use. It was actually a de-intensification of land use, in that the applicant's proposal was to eliminate 75 square feet of the existing floor area, and that the maximum seating was reduced from 492 seats to 388 seats. And lastly, that the project generated 0 peak hour trips, and pursuant to town code, that is not considered an intensification of land use. So lastly, I'm going to jump ahead and discuss the future of the assessment district. With the parking assessment district expiring at the end of 2013, there are several options for the future community and council consideration, and those include: 1 is the no action. You could just let the district expire with no further property assessments for the parking or other improvements. Another option would be to reestablish the district, and that would be to prepare a package for election by the property owners to reestablish the district for an extended period of time to fund future parking improvements and opportunities. Any new district would likely have to include assessments significantly higher than the last one to fund any new structured parking. The third alternative could be to establish an alternative assessment district, and that would be to prepare a package for election by the property owners to establish a business improvement or other property owners assessment district to fund district marketing, maintenance, and other improvements given the state's elimination of redevelopment. And that concludes staff's presentation, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey, and also thank you again for the report, which I think educated a lot of us to what we didn't know or had forgotten. Questions of Ms. Bailey? Ms. Jensen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bailey. I had a question regarding the definition of intensification of use, which was raised in our desk item, and also you indicated here you looked at the town code. And what I gleaned from your comments was that the intensification of use is only measured by square footage or, for example, seats in a restaurant or in a theater. Is there any other measurement of what an intensification of use is in our town code?
Yes, there's another section in the town code under the conditional use permit section that deals with the parking. So if it generates 5 or more peak hour trips, that would also be an intensification of use.
So there is nothing in our town code or policies that you found which measures intensification of use by what I'm going to call the nature of the use, as opposed to measurable things like parking, square footage, or seats?
It does relate to the parking, and I'm kind of use your example that for restaurants that do not have alcohol in the downtown, it's 1 parking space for every 4 seats. If the restaurant does serve alcohol, then, or there's a separate bar, then it's 1 parking space for 3 seats. So again, it deals with parking, but there's that example with the use.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Bailey. If you intend to speak on this item, please submit a card. I do have 2 cards. Larry Arzi.
Larry Arzi. First of all, I want to say that I support the CUP for Los Gatos Theater. I always had. My problem is the culture that exists in the town manager's office of bending the rules. For the past few years, new restaurant space has been allowed where retail used to be, all magically meeting the parking district regulations. In the past, the applicant either paid into a parking district to increase intensification, or as in the case of the Opera House, was made to actually provide valet and real parking spaces behind the Verizon building. Nowadays, the town manager claims they all meet parking requirements. Before his arrival, they did not. New interpretation, I guess, from a new manager. Managers have a bag full of tricks to get you to do what they want. They delay hearings, they postpone reports, they do not supply all the information, leaving out important things. They bend the truth, and they change interpretations. But in the case of the movie theater, there was no need to do this, as there was 100% support for it. So why not interpret the parking district regulations consistently? Something could have been worked out. As with the Opera House, it got worked out. Instead, the manager took it upon himself to make sure the project made it through, and now tells me he told the truth as he knew it at the time. He also continues to bring up that we are on the eve of an ending of the parking district, which really concerns me. As a matter of fact, it scares the hell out of me. Assessments were paid by me and the rest of the property owners. So I don't know what on earth he's thinking. I guess he just wants to intensify the entire downtown business district. It took years to form this parking district, and the regulations clearly contain restrictions for the new parking spaces, which is not allowed unless paid into the district. The unusable attic in the theater would be new space. The use of residential spaces for a bar is new space. The manager prevaricated when he claimed the building remodeled met regulations for the parking district. If he claims he did not know this, then he is inept. He broke the pact between the property owners and the town in the formation of this parking district. This has been the biggest and most alarming foreshadowing of what yet to come, a vile and unnecessary move that will certainly impact the CBD and the possibility of forming a new district in the future. The trust of the property owner is being protected.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, first of all, if there are questions for you. Ms. Jensen?
Mr. Arzi, Ms. Bailey presented different scenarios for going forward with the parking assessment district once it ended in 2013. Would you share your comments on which one, if any, you would support?
I would love to see a new parking district, but with what has gone on, I don't think the trust level of the property owners is there anymore. You know, if we had a new parking district, it would have to be so ironclad to keep people like our town manager, who is not aware of what the history of Los Gatos is about, to do what he thinks is best, not what he thinks is best for the town.
Further questions? I understand that you just said that you didn't think a parking district would be viable at this point, but if one went forward, what individual organization would you see as organizing it? Because as Ms. Bailey pointed out, there would be preparing a package for the new district, preparing a package for alternative assessment. Logistically, how would you see that coming to be?
There are numerous property owners downtown who would love to see more additional parking, real parking. The last parking district did not provide real parking. It was a pretty word they used for making it, accessible, usable, that I read today. So I would gather the pro-parking district property owners together, sit down with them, and come up with a way of formulating a new parking district.
All right, I have no other questions. Thank you. I only have one other card. Lee Quintana. So after Ms. Quintana speaks, I will be closing the public hearing unless someone else submits a card.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. I only have a few comments, and one is that one of the first things I did as a graduate student at San Jose State in a class that I took on California Environmental Quality Act was to analyze the EIR for the downtown, I think it was called the specific plan, that included a discussion of parking. And I remember very distinctly at that time going to the professor and saying, they're counting spaces in that are used in an unpaved lot. Now that they're paving it, they're considering them new parking spaces. And that just didn't make sense to me. And I think that's the origin of the term phantom parking. And I still see that in that if we have 300 plus parking spaces in the parking district that were paid for and included, that in fact haven't been used as part of a specific permit application, then why do we still have parking problems? I mean, that's a lot of parking spaces that would make it easier to park on weekends and Friday nights, etc. So those are two of my comments. The other thing is, in looking at the application again for the theater, it was referenced that there was a CUP in 1991, but the attachment, I believe, in the packet, or maybe I asked for it separately, was actually an ANS application through the earthquake committee. So I guess, and I'm still, I don't understand why a parking analysis was not included in the application for the theater, which is routine for most applications, showing what the requirements are and what the existing parking is. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Questions of Ms. Quintana? Seeing none, having no more cards, I will now close the public hearing portion of this agenda item and look to the council. I will note that there are items under future of assessment district that staff has suggested we weigh in on. Before I get it to council, Mr. Larson, anything else? All right, council. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I want to commend staff and Ms. Bailey for a very thoroughgoing history of this whole process. To those of us who were here during that time, it has been somewhat mysterious, but to realize that after the '89 earthquake, the downtown was devastated, and the town had to reframe how it did its business because of the fact that we were determined to preserve our historic core and not go the way of Santa Cruz, which was demo as soon as you get a chance. And I want to commend the council at that time for being forward-thinking and being able to make adjustments to allow us to recover and recover very well. From my perspective, it was an emergency situation, and in the course of a couple of years, we came out of that stronger than we were when we went in. And I think that the intention to develop the parking district was part and parcel to allow that to occur. And it was intended at that time to allow us to actually provide parking so that we could create an economic engine in the downtown that would allow us to survive and thrive. I also believe that at this point in time, we need to continue to look at what our rules were, how we got there, and not kind of revisionist view our history, in that the significance of what we accomplished is evident in our thriving downtown at this time. I would be very curious to see what kinds of response we would get from the business community to either of the latter two options available to us, because I think it'd be a very strong response. I don't think that the gross generalization about what the business community feels is actually able to be validated. I think that my own experience is that the business community is open and willing to do whatever it needs to do to make things work for the businesses in the downtown. And I would like to see us go forward in pursuing either the second or the third option. I think do nothing is not an option. But my own contact with members of the business community indicates that they feel that they could go forward and continue the business district, the parking district, or create something new. I would prefer to actually see something in the third category, to focus on maintenance and beautification in the downtown, asking the business, those business owners who are profiting and benefiting from the downtown experience that we provide them. I'd like to see those people step up and say, yeah, we can actually do more. And I think that would be to all our benefit. So I applaud the staff for this thoroughgoing history, for correcting any misconceived notions about what's out there, and would like to see us pursue the options that are presented, because 2013 is the closure date. That's when the district is to discontinue. So that would be my statement of interest at this point in time. Madam Mayor, we're only expressing what we've seen. We're not obligated to any kind of outcome tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, that I'm going to defer to staff. I would just see us weighing in on our ideas based upon the staff report.
There is no formal action needed tonight. This could have actually been done as a study session, but the scheduling made sense to do it as we did.
Ms. Jensen.
Given that limitation, and that we're not considering anything with respect to the theater, I nonetheless found it interesting that the town has recognized the difference between alcohol serving and non-alcohol serving for purposes of parking. So 1 to 4, 1 to 3 is interesting, because apparently, at least at some point, the town decided that alcohol created an intensification of use in some respect that required more parking. That's just a comment. With respect to the parking assessment district, I think we've already made a recommendation tonight for staff to reach out to stakeholders with respect to the Civic Center space. I think it makes perfect sense for us to reach out to stakeholders in the downtown, property owners, to determine what it is that they think would be most beneficial. So rather than direct the staff to a particular outcome, my comment would be to direct staff to engage in an outreach process to stakeholders, bring them together to discuss what they think would be an appropriate parking assessment district, if that's what they want, or if they want something different. But I think we should start discussing it with them rather than go to the bottom up rather than the top down.
For Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Just wondering, question for staff, how quickly can we reach out? Obviously, we have a deadline of the 31st of December. And what is the end goal? Is the end goal to say we want to build a new garage? Is the end goal to say we would like to take the spot between Bachman and Highway 9 and put underground parking under that lot? How much will that cost? How quickly are we even going to present a proposal? Or are we just going to say we're going to reach out and say, would you like to create a whole new district? But what is the end result, or what is the goal of creating that new district? And has there been any studies or estimates, or how many spots we can gain, how much will this cost the property owners, those types of things?
Further discussion? Council? All right, then let me weigh in on this. With regard to the history, going backwards and looking at the numbers and the square footage and how we got from A to B, generally downtown and specifically with regard to the theater, it's clear that there was no mathematical precision, especially in 1982. But that's the past. I can appreciate the fact that liquor service is an intensification of use, but I also can appreciate that this property was considered or characterized as retail. I'm not saying I agree with the history. I'm not saying I agree with the fact that the math was not precise, but I do understand that that's history, and we now need to, one, be more careful in going forward, and then think about how it is we're going to go forward. And on page 5, we have various proposals with the prepare a package for a new district, prepare a package for an alternative assessment district. And I don't disagree with anything anybody has said, Mr. Brzezinski, Mr. Leonardis, Ms. Jensen, but what I do see is that I see that any future assessment district will be, as far as organizational, I see it being driven by the business community, whether it's by individuals, as what I think I heard Mr. Arzi say, or whether it's by the chamber or any other business district. That's who I would see being the driving force, organizing it, and in response to Mr. Leonardis, determining what it is they want to drive for. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a couple of points. I'm totally in agreement with what you just said. And I think we all need to acknowledge that there will not be a new parking assessment district by January 1st, 2014. There just is not enough time to organize something that is that complex and controversial. And that secondly, as the chamber and property owners go forward, there is an old document, the KEKU report, from the year 2000 that does give, in those dollars at that time, what the cost is per parking space for each of the lots that were considered at that time underground and above ground. So that would be a starting point for them, and there'd have to be new estimates made, but at least there's a little bit of information available as they figure out what their needs are and what they're willing to pay for.
Further discussion? Seeing nothing. Oh, Mr. Leonardis.
Not to delay the meeting any further. So our action or lack thereof this evening is to let the business owners come forward, and we're going to take a hands-off approach. Is that?
I will step in, and I know Mr. Larson will ultimately step in, but what I see us doing is just sharing our concepts, but we're not making any decisions. We're not saying that the business is going to do it, it's not going to do it, it's going to be above ground, below ground. We are not making those kinds of decisions. Further council input? Mr. Larson.
Staff appreciates the feedback from council on the quality of the staff work that was done for this item tonight, and we will reach out. The mayor and staff meets with the Chamber of Commerce on a monthly basis, and that might be a good first step to talk about what's an appropriate process to engage the downtown business community in this discussion if they want to lead it and have it.
All right. Anything further from staff, or do you need anything further from us?
Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank everybody. Meeting's adjourned.